Hello everyone, and welcome back to Mr. Night Fear. I know many of you listen to these stories to help you fall asleep. So before you get settled in, I'd love for you to leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from. And if you're enjoying the episodes, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. When I moved into my first apartment, I was excited to have my own space. It was a small unit in a quiet building on the outskirts of Silver Springs, a sleepy little town just far enough from the city to feel like I had some peace. The building itself was old, probably built in the 50s, and there were only a handful of tenants. Everyone kept to themselves, making it feel like a cozy little community. Among my neighbors was Mr. Jensen, an elderly man who lived across the hall. He didn't say much, but we always exchanged polite nods or a quick hello in the hallway. One evening, as I was heading out for a quick dinner, I noticed that Mr. Jensen's door was slightly ajar. It struck me as odd because he always kept it shut. I paused, calling out, "Mr. Jensen, are you okay?" There was no reply. Hesitant but curious, I pushed the door open a little wider. The apartment was dark, and I could barely make out the furniture in the shadows. It didn't seem like anyone was home, but it was unlike him to leave the door like that. Maybe he'd gone out and just forgot to close it properly. I gently pushed the door shut and went about my evening, but something about it felt off. The next day, I ran into the landlord in the lobby and casually mentioned the door. He looked at me as if I'd said something strange. "Mr. Jensen moved out last week," he said, his voice laced with confusion. "He turned in his keys and everything." I blinked, not believing it. I saw him just yesterday. He was carrying groceries down the hall. The landlord frowned. "No, he's gone. That apartment's been vacant since Monday." That didn't sit right with me. I didn't know why, but the idea that I'd seen Mr. Jensen just the day before, carrying bags like it was any other day, didn't make sense. I tried to brush it off, convincing myself I had just mistaken someone else for him, or that it was some mix-up. But the more I thought about it, the stranger it felt. Over the next few nights, unsettling things began to happen. Late at night, I would hear strange noises coming from Mr. Jensen's apartment. Soft footsteps, the clink of dishes, and even the low murmur of a TV. I told myself it was just the building settling, or maybe I was hearing things, but the noises didn't stop. One evening, when I returned home late, I saw a faint glow from under Mr. Jensen's door. I froze in place, unsure of what to do. As I stood there, the light flickered and went out. The hallway fell into silence, and the door was suddenly closed, as if nothing had ever happened. My heart raced as I quickly entered my own apartment, locking the door behind me. That night, I was jolted awake by a soft knocking sound. It was coming from somewhere near my door, steady and persistent. My stomach twisted into knots as I crept over to the peephole. There was nothing there. I stood in the silence, waiting for the sound to return, but it never did. I told myself it was just my imagination, but I hardly slept at all after that. The next morning, I found the landlord again. "Are you sure no one is in Mr. Jensen's apartment?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He sighed, clearly frustrated. "Yes, I'm sure. It's empty. The cleaning crew's coming next week to get it ready for the next tenant." But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. A few days later, the strange noises stopped, and the apartment remained silent and dark. When the cleaning crew finally arrived, I overheard one of them talking to the landlord. That place was almost bare, the worker said, "just an old chair and some dust. It doesn't look like anyone lived there for years." That was the breaking point for me. The oddities couldn't be ignored anymore. I decided to move out shortly after. Even now, I can't explain what happened. Sometimes, I wonder if Mr. Jensen really left, if he was ever even real, or if something else was in that apartment, pretending to be him. When I was in college, I rented a small house just outside a quiet town in North Carolina. It was an old, single-story bungalow with a large, overgrown backyard and tall windows that let in the soft morning sun. The solitude was exactly what I needed for studying and unwinding, But once the sun dipped below the horizon, the house felt almost too still, eerily so. One evening, while I was sitting at the kitchen table working on a paper, I heard a soft tapping sound. It was rhythmic, like someone gently knocking on a window. I paused and listened closely, but the noise stopped just as quickly as it started. Figuring it was just a branch swaying in the breeze, I shook it off and went back to my work. A short while later, the tapping began again. This time, it was louder, and it seemed to come from the large bay window in the living room just behind me. A knot formed in my stomach as I turned to look. The curtains were drawn, and I couldn't see a thing outside. "Hello," I called out, my voice shaky. The tapping stopped instantly. Silence fell over the room, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Reluctantly, I stood up and pulled the curtains back. The backyard lay in the pale moonlight, the trees swaying in the breeze, but no one was there. I tried to convince myself it was just the wind, but the uneasy feeling lingered. The tapping continued each night, always around the same time, just after midnight. Every time, I would check the window, but find nothing there. It was impossible to focus on my studies, and I found myself dreading the nights, waiting for the sound to return. Determined to figure out what was happening, I left the curtains open one night. If someone, or something, was out there, I was going to see it. As midnight approached, I sat in the living room, every muscle tense, heart pounding. When the tapping began, I froze. This time, I saw it. There, just beyond the glass, a shadowy figure standing in the moonlit backyard. The figure was tall, its shape human but cloaked in darkness, its face obscured. My heart raced as I watched it slowly raise a hand and tap on the glass again, each tap deliberate, each one sending a chill down my spine. I couldn't move, couldn't even breathe, as the tapping continued, persistent and unnerving. Summoning every ounce of courage, I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and aimed it at the figure. The light cut through the dark, but the figure was gone. The backyard lay empty, as still as ever. I pulled the curtains shut, my hands trembling, and spent the rest of the night with every light in the house on, too frightened to sleep. The next morning, I told my landlord about the tapping. He listened with a solemn expression. "You're not the first to mention things like this," he said, his voice low. "This house has a history. Strange stuff's been happening here for years." I didn't stay much longer after that. The tapping continued, and the figure returned a few more times, always at midnight, always just beyond the glass. Even after I moved out, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, especially when I was near a window at night. I've only told a few close friends about this, and most of them don't believe me, but I know what I saw and what I heard. To this day, the sound of tapping on glass sends a cold shiver down my spine, and I can't help but glance over my shoulder, just in case. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. When I was 22, I worked as a night receptionist at a small, family-owned inn in Pine Lake, a quiet town nestled by the woods. It wasn't a glamorous job, but it paid the bills, and the quiet hours gave me plenty of time to read or study. The inn was old, with creaky wooden floors and low, flickering lights, but it had a certain charm, a piece of history in the middle of nowhere. One night, during my usual rounds, I decided to check on the unoccupied rooms. The inn wasn't very busy, so most of the second floor was empty. I walked down the long, narrow hallway, peeking into each room to make sure everything was in order. The last room at the end of the hall, room 214, had always unsettled me. It was rarely rented out, and the cleaning staff avoided it whenever they could, passing it off with whispered jokes about the strange occurrences. As I neared the door, I felt an inexplicable chill. The air grew colder, and a strange, almost oppressive silence blanketed the hallway. I told myself it was just the time of year, late fall, and the drafty inn, but something didn't sit right. When I reached for the doorknob, my hand froze. The door was slightly ajar, even though I was certain I had locked it just moments ago. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding unusually loud in the stillness. I pushed the door open slowly. The room was dark, lit only by the faint glow of the street lamp outside, casting long, eerie shadows on the walls. Everything seemed normal at first, just a neatly made bed and a small desk. But then I noticed the chair. It was pulled away from the desk, turned slightly, as though someone had been sitting there recently. I stepped inside, my flashlight cutting through the darkness, the beam flickering as I moved. The room felt wrong, like it was holding its breath, waiting. I stepped closer to the desk, and then I saw it, a faint impression on the bed, as though someone had been sitting there just moments ago. The blankets were still disturbed, the fabric pressed down as if by an unseen weight. My heart started pounding as I backed toward the door. That's when I heard it, a faint whisper, so soft I could barely make it out. It came from the farthest corner of the room, where the shadows were darkest. The air seemed to grow heavier. "Get out." I didn't wait to hear more. I turned and ran, slamming the door behind me as if I could shut out the darkness that seemed to follow me. Back at the front desk, I tried to calm myself, telling myself it was just my imagination, a trick of the mind in the quiet, lonely hours of the night. But the unease stayed with me, lingering like a fog, and I avoided room 214 for the rest of the night. The next morning, I told the innkeeper about what had happened. She gave me a long, measured look, half sympathy, half something else. "That room has always been strange," she said, her voice lowering. "Guests sometimes complain about feeling watched, and more than one has left in the middle of the night." I asked why they kept the room open if it made people so uncomfortable. She shrugged and said, "It's just a room. Whatever's in there, it's never hurt anyone." I wasn't so sure. I finished my time at the inn, but I never went near room 214 again. Even now, years later, I sometimes dream about that whisper and the imprint on the bed. Whatever was in that room, it wanted me to leave, and I'm glad I listened. During my last year of college, I found a small one-bedroom apartment on the edge of town, not far from campus. It was an older building with thin walls and outdated fixtures, but it was affordable, and the location was perfect for me. The only thing that felt off about the place was the ancient rotary phone mounted on the kitchen wall. It had been disconnected for years, just a relic of a bygone era. I figured it added some vintage charm, so I left it there, not giving it much thought. For the first few weeks, everything was normal. I fell into my usual routine, juggling classes, work, and the occasional night out with friends. But then one night, around midnight, the phone rang. I was lounging on the couch, watching TV, when the shrill, unmistakable sound of the rotary phone echoed through the apartment. At first, I thought I was hearing things. After all, the phone wasn't even plugged in. But as the ringing continued, I felt my heart race. I stood up, walked into the kitchen, and froze. There it was, hanging on the wall, the dial glowing faintly under the dim kitchen light. I stood there, staring at it, my pulse quickening. After a moment, I picked up the receiver. "Hello?" I said, my voice shaky. On the other end, there was a long silence, followed by the faintest crackling noise, and then a whisper, so soft and distant that I could barely hear it. "Why are you here?" I froze, my stomach dropping. "Who is this?" I asked, but the line went dead. The phone let out a low hum before falling silent. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, staring at the receiver before slowly placing it back on the cradle. It didn't ring again that night. The next morning, I called my landlord, asking about the phone. He laughed and reassured me that it hadn't been connected to anything in years. "It's just a decoration," he said. "Probably some weird electrical glitch. Nothing to worry about." I wanted to believe him, but something about his explanation didn't sit right with me. Over the next few weeks, the phone rang again, always at midnight, always with that same soft whisper. "Why are you here?" "You shouldn't stay. It's not safe." Each time, I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. After a few nights, I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to disconnect the phone completely. I unscrewed it from the wall, packed it away in a box, and stuffed it in the back of the closet. That night, for the first time in weeks, I managed to fall asleep without the ominous ringing. But then, around midnight, my cell phone rang. The number on the screen was blank, just a series of dashes. My heart skipped. I answered it, hesitantly. "Hello." The same whisper, clearer now. "I told you to leave." The call ended abruptly, and my phone returned to its home screen. My mind raced, but I couldn't stay in that apartment any longer. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I packed my things, broke my lease, and left. I didn't even bother to get my deposit back. I couldn't stay there, not after everything that had happened. To this day, I have no idea who or what was on the other end of those calls. I've tried to convince myself it was just a prank or some strange coincidence, but deep down, I know something was wrong with that apartment. Whatever it was, I'm just glad I listened to the warning and left when I did. When I was 19, my friends and I decided to explore an old bridge just outside our small town, Silver Springs. The bridge had a reputation. Locals often whispered about strange happenings and eerie sounds surrounding it. Some claimed they'd seen a figure standing in the middle of the bridge on foggy nights, while others spoke of soft, haunting whispers carried by the wind. We didn't believe any of it, of course, but the idea of seeing something out there sounded like a thrill, so we figured we'd check it out. We got there just after sunset. The evening was chilly, with clouds hanging low in the sky, and the wind whistled through the branches of the tall pines surrounding the area. The bridge itself was old, its wooden beams weathered and worn, creaking as we stepped onto it. Below, the shallow creek murmured as it flowed over rocks, its sound oddly calming at first. As we walked along the bridge, we joked and laughed, trying to keep things lighthearted. But when we reached the middle, something changed. The air turned colder, and suddenly, the wind stopped. Everything fell unnervingly still. A strange sense of heaviness hung in the air, and I could feel a shiver run down my spine. "Do you feel that?" one of my friends asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Before anyone could respond, we heard it, a faint sound like someone crying. It was distant at first, almost like a breeze, but it was real. A soft sobbing carried on the wind, and as we strained to listen, the cries grew louder and more distinct. It was coming from the far end of the bridge. "Hello!" someone called out, but the crying didn't stop. Hesitant but curious, we started walking toward the sound, our footsteps echoing in the eerie silence. As we reached the far end of the bridge, we saw her. A woman, standing just beyond the edge of the planks, her back turned toward us. She wore a long, flowing white gown, its fabric catching the dim light as though it shimmered. Her shoulders shook, as though she were sobbing uncontrollably. We froze, unsure of what to do. One of my friends stepped forward and called out, "Are you okay?" The woman stopped crying. She stood perfectly still for a moment, then slowly turned to face us. My heart dropped into my stomach. Her face was pale and hollow, her eyes dark, empty voids that seemed to stare right through us. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but no sound came out, only the chilling gust of wind that seemed to rise out of nowhere, scattering leaves at our feet. We didn't stick around to see what would happen next. A scream broke the silence, and we bolted. Our footsteps pounded the old wooden planks as we ran back toward the safety of the other side. When we finally reached the shore, we turned to look back at the bridge, but the woman was gone. The cries had stopped, and the bridge was as empty as it had been when we first arrived. We never talked about what happened that night. It was too strange, too terrifying to even put into words. Even now, years later, I can still hear that sobbing echoing in my mind. I haven't been back to that bridge since, and I don't ever intend to. Whatever was out there, it wasn't something meant to be found. When I was a kid, my grandparents lived in a sprawling farmhouse on the edge of Pine Lake, a quiet town tucked away in the rolling hills of rural Missouri. One of the most striking features of their home was the large grandfather clock that stood in their living room. It was an imposing piece, dark oak with intricate carvings, and an ornate brass pendulum that swung with a steady, rhythmic motion. The clock had been in the family for generations, passed down from my great-grandfather, and my grandpa took great pride in maintaining it. One summer, I stayed with my grandparents for a few weeks while my parents went on a trip. Every night, as I lay in bed, I could hear the comforting tick-tock of the clock echoing from the living room. It was a sound that felt like home, something steady to hold onto in the quiet night. But one evening, as I was lying in bed, the ticking stopped. I woke up in the dead of night, the usual rhythm gone, replaced by an eerie silence that sent a chill through me. I figured the clock had just malfunctioned, but then I heard it, a soft, rhythmic tapping. The sound didn't come from the clock, though. It was coming from the hallway outside my bedroom. I sat up in bed, straining to hear more clearly. The tapping grew louder, closer, like someone, or something, was walking down the hall, step by slow step. My heart pounded in my chest as I pulled the covers up to my chin, frozen in fear. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the tapping stopped. The next morning, I told my grandfather what I had heard. He gave me a long, thoughtful look before saying, "The clock hasn't stopped in years. I'll take a look at it." Later that afternoon, I watched as he opened the clock's door and inspected its inner workings. "It's fine," he said after a moment, sounding relieved. "Nothing's wrong. Sometimes old clocks just need a little nudge." He wound the clock, and sure enough, the pendulum began to swing again, filling the house with the familiar ticking. That night, I felt comforted, thinking whatever it was had passed. But just as I began to drift off to sleep, the ticking stopped again. This time, I lay there in the dark, holding my breath, waiting. I wasn't disappointed. The tapping returned, but now it was accompanied by something else, a soft whisper, so faint it was almost inaudible. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone of the voice was desperate, almost pleading. The next day, I told my grandmother about the whispering. She looked uneasy, her face pale as she exchanged a glance with my grandfather. "It's probably just the old house settling," she said, but her voice wavered slightly, as if she didn't truly believe it herself. On my last night there, I decided I had to face whatever was haunting that clock. I stayed up late in the living room, sitting by the clock, watching the pendulum swing. The house was quiet, save for the soft ticking that filled the stillness. Then, just before midnight, the ticking stopped. The temperature in the room dropped and the air grew heavy, as if something was pressing down on me. I could hear the tapping once more, followed by the now familiar whisper. This time, the words were unmistakable. "Help me." I couldn't take it anymore. I rushed out of the room straight to my grandparents' bedroom, waking them up. My grandfather followed me back to the living room, but by the time we got there, the clock was ticking again, and everything felt normal. Too normal, almost. My heart was still racing, but the air was calm once more. The next day, I left to head home, thankful to put the eerie experience behind me. It wasn't until years later that I learned the true history of the clock. It had belonged to my great-grandfather, who had passed away under mysterious circumstances. Some say it was sudden, while others whispered it might have been foul play. My grandmother quietly admitted that odd things had always happened around the clock, but over time, they had simply learned to live with it. I still think about that summer sometimes, especially when I hear the ticking of a clock in the dead of night. Whatever was tied to that grandfather clock, I know it wasn't just my imagination. It was something reaching out, desperate to be heard. When I was 14, my family moved into an old farmhouse on the outskirts of Pine Lake, a quiet town known for its foggy mornings and long, chilly winters. The house was a classic fixer-upper, with peeling paint and a sprawling backyard that seemed to go on forever. It had an attic, one of those places you only read about in stories, dusty, filled with forgotten treasures and old furniture, and buried under a blanket of cobwebs. My parents told me to stay away from it because the floorboards were weak, but curiosity always got the better of me. One night, after a long day of school, I was lying in bed when I noticed a faint light leaking from the attic hatch in the hallway. At first, I thought it was just the glow of moonlight reflecting off something, but this light felt different, steady, purposeful, like it was trying to grab my attention. I sat up and stared at the faint outline of the glow creeping through the cracks above me. "Mom? Dad?" I called out, but the house was quiet, too quiet. There was no answer. The temptation was too strong to ignore, so I grabbed my flashlight, heart pounding with each step, and pulled down the attic ladder. The old wood creaked as the ladder unfolded, and for a brief moment, the light above flickered, as though it reacted to the movement. My breath caught in my throat, but I pushed the fear aside and climbed up. The attic air was icy, a sharp contrast to the warmth of the rest of the house. The light seemed to be coming from one far corner. I aimed my flashlight in that direction, but all I saw was an old rocking chair and a few stacked boxes. But the light, it didn't make sense. It flickered in time with the soft hum that began to fill the air, like someone was trying to sing, but the words were lost. I took a few cautious steps forward, the floorboards groaning under my feet. As I reached the chair, the light flickered once more, and the temperature dropped, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Then, to my horror, the rocking chair slowly began to move, swaying back and forth, as though someone had just risen from it. My heart skipped a beat, and I stumbled back, tripping over a loose plank, my flashlight clattering to the floor. Then came the sound, a soft, haunting hum, like someone singing a lullaby in the distance. The voice was so faint, yet it felt like it was all around me, filling the cold air. My legs froze as fear gripped me, and without thinking, I bolted, rushing down the ladder, slamming the hatch shut behind me, my breath shallow and quick. The next morning, I tried to explain what had happened. My dad just laughed it off, calling it my overactive imagination. But my mom, she wasn't laughing. She looked troubled, as though something had been bothering her about the attic since we moved in. She admitted that she'd never liked it, but didn't want to say anything, not wanting to scare me. Over the next few weeks, I noticed the light flickering again, showing up at random times, never staying long enough to get a good look. I refused to go back up there, and eventually, my dad nailed the hatch shut, saying it wasn't safe to keep climbing up. Years later, when we sold the farmhouse, the new owners brought it up. They told me they had heard strange noises at night and seen the light too. They seemed unfazed by it all, almost like they were expecting it. "We've heard rumors about this place," they said, "especially about the attic." I still can't explain what I saw or heard that night. The light, the rocking chair, the lullaby-like hum. It all felt like someone was trying to reach out. But for what? I'll never know. I just hope, wherever they are, they found peace. When I was in my early 20s, I used to take long evening walks around Pine Ridge Park, a quiet spot on the outskirts of my small town. It wasn't the most popular park, just a few joggers, dog walkers, and the occasional couple out for a stroll. I found peace in its solitude, a chance to clear my mind after the long hours at my desk job. One crisp autumn evening, as I walked my usual route along the path by the old pond, I spotted a man sitting on a weathered bench at the far edge. His silhouette was dark against the orange glow of the setting sun, and he wore a heavy coat and wide-brimmed hat. He sat so still, his eyes locked on the water, that it struck me as odd. There was something unsettling about him, though I couldn't put my finger on it. He didn't belong here, not like the rest of us who visited the park regularly. I gave him a polite nod as I passed by, but he didn't acknowledge me, no glance, no sign of recognition. I shrugged it off, continuing my walk along the familiar trail, soon forgetting about the strange man. The next evening I returned. The air was cooler now, with the first hints of winter creeping in, and I found myself once again near the pond. There he was, sitting on the same bench, perfectly still, eyes fixed on the water. My heart skipped a beat. It felt almost unnatural. I told myself it was just a coincidence. Maybe he was a regular visitor like me. Still, a part of me couldn't shake the eerie feeling. The days passed, and the man was there every night, always on the same bench, never moving, always staring into the dark water. I never saw him arrive, and I never saw him leave. It was as though he appeared out of nowhere each evening and simply vanished into the night. One night, curiosity tugged at me, and I decided to sit across from him. hoping for some kind of explanation. "Nice evening," I said quietly, trying to break the silence. He didn't answer, not even a slight shift of his head. His face remained expressionless, his eyes locked on the water. He was so pale, almost ghostly, and I began to feel a strange chill settle in the pit of my stomach. After a few minutes of awkward silence, I gave up and walked away, a sense of dread creeping over me. The next evening, something inside me urged me to try again. As I walked toward the pond, I saw him once more. But this time, when I reached the edge of the water, he wasn't staring at the pond. His eyes were fixed directly on me, his gaze sharp and cold. I froze, a wave of panic washing over me. I tried to move, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. Then, without a word, he stood up and turned away, walking into the woods beyond the pond. "Hey, wait!" I called out, my voice shaky. But when I reached the trees, he was gone. The air had turned colder, and the woods were deathly silent. No rustle of leaves, no hint of movement. Feeling unnerved, I decided to end my walk early and headed home, my mind racing. That night, I couldn't shake the image of his eyes, the emptiness in them, as though he wasn't quite human. His stare felt like it had pierced something deep inside me, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. The next evening, I returned to the park, but the bench by the pond was empty. The man was gone. Part of me felt relieved, but there was an undercurrent of unease that lingered, something I couldn't explain. I never saw him again after that night, but I still find myself haunted by those silent encounters by the pond. Who was he? Why was he always there? And where did he go that night? I never found the answers, and I stopped walking through the park after dark. Some mysteries, I suppose, are better left unsolved. When I was about 8 years old, my family moved into a house on the outskirts of a small town called Pine Hollow. The house was old but had a certain charm, with a wide front porch that wrapped around the front, and a tall attic window that looked out onto the overgrown yard. From the moment we moved in, I could feel the house wasn't quite like the others on the block. There was something unsettling about it. A few weeks after we got settled, I started noticing something strange about that attic window. Whenever I played outside, it felt as though someone was always watching me from up there. One afternoon, while running around in the yard, I looked up and saw a porcelain doll sitting in the window. It had pale skin, curly brown hair, and wore a faded pink dress. It was perched on the windowsill, staring down at me. "Mom, is that your doll?" I asked when I ran inside. She gave me a confused look. "What doll?" "The one in the attic window," I said, tugging on her sleeve. Curious, she came outside with me to look, but the doll was gone. "There's nothing there," she said. "You must be imagining things." But I wasn't. Over the next few weeks, I saw the doll in the window several times. It always appeared when I was outside, and by the time I went inside to show someone, it would vanish. My mom kept insisting it was just my imagination, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the doll was always watching me. One afternoon, when my mom was busy in the kitchen, I decided to investigate. I climbed the narrow, creaky stairs up to the attic, flashlight in hand. The attic was filled with old furniture, dusty boxes, and forgotten trinkets. The air felt heavy, and there was an odd coldness near the window at the far end of the room. When I reached the window, the doll wasn't there, but the sill was dusty, except for one small, clean spot where something had clearly been sitting. My flashlight caught a faint set of tiny footprints on the floor, leading away from the window. They looked like a child's, and they stopped abruptly in the middle of the room. My heart raced as I bolted back downstairs. "Mom, you need to see this," I gasped, but she just shook her head. "It's just your imagination," she said dismissively. "Don't go up there again." But I couldn't shake it off. The doll continued to appear in the attic window from time to time, always when I was outside, and disappearing whenever I tried to show anyone else. Eventually, my family decided to move away from the house, and I never saw the doll again. Years later, I brought it up to my mom, hoping she could give me some sort of explanation. She paused for a long time before saying, "You know, I always thought that attic was off, but I didn't want to scare you." To this day, I don't know if the doll was real or if something else was in that attic watching me. Whatever it was, I'm just relieved we left Pine Hollow behind. It was my first year as a nurse at Pine Lake Hospital, a place that had been around for nearly a century. While most of the building had been renovated, there was one wing that had been left untouched, locked away from the rest of the hospital. The staff referred to it as the old wing, though no one ever seemed to want to talk about it. I quickly learned that the keys to that part of the hospital were kept in the supervisor's office, and they were never to be used, unless absolutely necessary. Rumors about the wing circulated like wildfire among the nurses. Some of the older staff said the wing had once been home to psychiatric patients. Others claimed it had been sealed off after a mysterious outbreak, one that was never officially explained. But the most unsettling stories were about the strange figures that people had seen in the dark hallways and the whispers that echoed through the building in the dead of night. One particularly quiet shift, I found myself walking the halls during my rounds when I ended up near the old wing. The hallway was dimly lit, and the heavy, rusted double doors at the end of it looked imposing, like they were hiding something. I felt a cold shiver crawl up my spine as I walked closer, the air turning chillier with every step. It was hard to ignore the faint whispers that seemed to come from behind those doors. I stopped in my tracks, straining to listen. The whispers were barely audible, like distant voices calling from the shadows, but I knew I wasn't imagining it. My mind told me it was probably the wind, or maybe just the building settling, but something pulled me closer. I reached out to touch the cold, metal handle, and then, suddenly, I heard a loud bang, like something had slammed against the other side of the door. My heart raced as I jumped back, staring at the doors. It felt real, too real. I spun around and hurried back to the nurse's station, the feeling of being watched creeping up my neck. Later that night, I mentioned the incident to Janet, one of the senior nurses who had worked there for decades. She gave me a knowing look, almost like she'd been expecting me to ask. "You heard them, didn't you? The whispers," she said softly. "What are they?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, afraid of what I might hear. Janet paused for a long time before responding, as if weighing the words. "No one really knows. Some say it's the spirits of patients who died there, still trying to reach out. Others think it's just the old building settling. Either way, I wouldn't stand near those doors again, if I were you." I took her advice to heart, avoiding the old wing as much as I could after that. But a few weeks later, something happened that I couldn't explain. During another quiet shift, I passed the hallway again, and to my surprise, the doors were slightly ajar. A dim light spilled into the hallway, and once again I heard the whispers. Only this time, they were louder, clearer. I froze, unsure of what to do. No one was allowed in the old wing, but the door was wide open. Steeling myself, I took a deep breath and called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" The whispers stopped, as though they had been waiting for me to speak. The silence that followed was suffocating. I took a step closer and peeked through the gap in the doors. The hallway beyond was empty. The light flickered once, then went out completely, leaving the room in total darkness. I reported the incident to my supervisor, but by the time she came to check, the doors were locked once again. She dismissed it as a maintenance issue, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was still lingering in that darkened wing. After a year, I left Pine Lake Hospital, but the memory of the old wing has stayed with me. I still find myself wondering what was behind those doors, what was trying to reach out to me that night, and were those whispers a warning, or something more? Hey everyone! I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. A few years ago, I moved into an old building in a small town called Pine Lake. The place was full of charm with its creaky wooden floors, large windows that let in the morning light, and a unique character that felt both nostalgic and a little eerie. The landlord, a quiet older man named Mr. O'Connor, handed me a single key when I moved in. It was simple. One key to unlock both the front door of the building and my apartment. It was straightforward until I discovered the other key. About a month after I moved in, I was cleaning out a drawer in the kitchen that had been left behind by the previous tenant. Among the usual odds and ends, old pizza receipts, random screws, and dried up pens, I found a small, tarnished key. It didn't fit anything in the apartment, but something about it made me keep it. Maybe it was the curiosity, or maybe I just wanted to know more about the apartment's past. That night, as I was lying in bed, the sound of faint clicking interrupted the silence. It was soft and rhythmic, almost like someone trying to turn a lock. I sat up, listening hard. It was coming from the front door. My heart raced as I crept out of bed and peered through the peephole. The hallway was empty. I checked the locks. Both were secure, and tried to reassure myself that it was probably just the building settling, as old buildings often do. But the next night the clicking returned, louder this time, as though someone was purposefully trying to unlock the door from the outside. Again, I checked the peephole. No one was there. The sound stopped the moment I opened the door. The following day, I decided to test the strange key. I tried it in every lock I could find, but none of them fit. Frustrated, I placed the key on the kitchen counter and went about my day. That night, as I lay in bed, the clicking started again, but this time it was followed by a soft, unmistakable creak, the sound of a door slowly opening. I froze. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at the front door, which was still securely locked and bolted. The apartment felt different. The air had grown cold, heavy, as if someone, or something, was there with me. Summoning every ounce of courage, I grabbed a flashlight and checked every room. Nothing seemed out of place. All the windows were shut, and everything was locked up tight. The next morning, I mentioned the strange noises to Mr. O'Connor. He looked taken aback and asked, "No one else should have a key to your apartment. Did you find anything unusual when you moved in?" I told him about the key. His face immediately darkened. "You should get rid of that," he said, his voice serious. "The last tenant. She left in a hurry. She mentioned things happening. Strange things." I didn't ask for any more details. That evening, I threw the key away, hoping that would be the end of it. The noises stopped, and for a while, the apartment felt normal again. But then, one night, months later, I came home to find the key back on the kitchen counter. It was exactly as I had left it, tarnished and worn, but there was no way it could have gotten there. I had thrown it out. I packed up my things and moved out the following week. I didn't tell anyone about the key, but even now, sometimes I wonder, was it connected to whatever was trying to get into my apartment? Or had it been inside the whole time? A few years ago, my friends and I decided to take a weekend road trip through the countryside. We didn't have any particular destination in mind. We just needed a break from the city and wanted to enjoy the freedom of the open road. The plan was simple: drive until we found a perfect spot to camp, then head back the next day. The first part of the trip was uneventful. We passed through small, sleepy towns, open fields, and forests. We stopped here and there to snap some photos or grab a quick snack. By late afternoon, we found ourselves driving along a narrow, winding road that seemed to stretch on forever through a dense, almost impenetrable forest. The GPS showed it as a shortcut to a campground, but there weren't any road signs, and we hadn't seen another car in miles. As the sun started to dip below the horizon, the trees closed in around us. The road seemed to get even narrower, the thick branches of the trees overhead forming a canopy. It was like driving through a tunnel, and the air turned noticeably colder. "Are you sure this is the right way?" my friend Sarah asked, her voice shaky. "It's what the GPS says," I replied, but even I could feel the unease creeping in. After about 15 minutes, the GPS lost signal. The map froze and the screen blinked, no service. We stopped the car, hoping for a quick fix, but that's when we noticed something unsettling. The entire forest was eerily still. No rustling of leaves, no chirping birds or rustling animals, just Silence. The world outside the car felt like it had come to a complete halt. "We should turn back," Sarah suggested, her voice trembling. Everyone agreed, but when I turned the car around, the road behind us was gone. Where there had been a narrow path just moments before, now there was nothing but dense forest, the trees packed tightly together, as if they had never been parted by a road. A wave of panic hit us, and we frantically tried to figure out what was going on. We decided to keep moving forward, hoping to find some kind of exit. But the road stretched on endlessly, the trees growing more twisted as if they were reaching out to trap us. The headlights barely cut through the darkness, and the clock on the dashboard froze at 9:47 p.m., no matter how much time passed. Then, in the distance, we saw a faint light flicker. Desperate for something familiar, we drove toward it. As we got closer, we realized it was an old, abandoned gas station. The windows were boarded up, and the rusted pumps looked as though they hadn't been used in decades. But it was the only sign of civilization we had seen for what felt like hours. We got out of the car to explore, but the moment our feet hit the cracked pavement, the light above the station flickered and went out. The air around us grew thick, and the silence was broken only by a sound. Slow, heavy footsteps, deliberate, and coming closer. Our hearts pounded in our chests, and without a second thought, we jumped back into the car. We didn't look back. We just drove fast, not caring which direction the road took us. After what felt like an eternity of twists and turns, we suddenly found ourselves back on a main highway, as if the forest had released us. The GPS flickered back to life, and the clock on the dashboard began ticking normally again. We were miles away from where we had started, with no idea how we got there. None of us ever spoke about that night again. None of us ever returned to that part of the countryside. Whatever happened on that road, it wasn't natural. And to this day, I can't shake the feeling that something followed us back. Hey everyone, I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. Years went by, and Hibby eventually settled into our lives. But then, out of nowhere, we got a call. A friend at the local shelter told us about a dachshund that needed a home. We went to meet him, and when I saw him for the first time, I froze. His face, his eyes, they were so familiar, like staring into the eyes of Charlie. The same expressions, the same warm gaze. Even now, Norman, our new puppy, reminds me so much of Charlie. I often catch myself wondering, could Norman be a way for Charlie to let me know he's okay? Maybe it's all in my head, but when I look into Norman's eyes, I can almost hear Charlie's bark echo in my mind. 4 years later, Norman is now a part of our family. But still, every now and then, I'll hear something that makes my heart race. The soft jingling of a collar, a faint rustle in the hallway when no one's there. Even when both dogs, Hitty and Norman, are asleep beside me, I still feel the presence of my old dogs in the house. It's as though they're still here, watching over me. Just last night, I woke up to find my door closed, both dogs sleeping soundly beside me. But as I lay there, something felt familiar. It was like Charlie, or maybe Cindy, was sitting by my feet again, just like they used to when they were alive. I reached down, half expecting to feel the soft warmth of their fur, but when I looked, there was nothing. No dogs, no shadows, just the quiet stillness of the room. It had been years since I'd felt something like that. The last time, I think, was in 2004. It's moments like these that bring me comfort, but also sadness. I never got to say goodbye to Charlie when we took him to the vet. I was too uncomfortable, too unsure of what to do in that moment. Now, years later, I wish I could have held him just once more. But sometimes, when I feel the presence of my old dogs, I think it's their way of telling me they're still with me. Even though they're gone, I can still feel them here. Whenever I tell someone these stories, or write them down, I get teary-eyed. Whether it's about Charlie and Cindy, or a friend I lost years ago, or my grandparents, The memories are always bittersweet. I love remembering them, but it's hard to let go. When I share it with others, they always ask, "What are you going to say?" That you saw the ghosts of your dogs. The thing is, I'm not sure what to call it. It's not about believing in ghosts, but about the feeling, the sense that those we love, whether human or animal, are still with us in some way. For now, I'm the only one in the house who seems to notice these things. My mom used to mention it, but she hasn't said anything in a while. Maybe it's for the best. After all, some things are meant to be felt, not spoken. This happened about 3 years ago, but even now, it feels like it happened just yesterday. The place was a remote, historic inn in the countryside, somewhere in the hills of West Virginia. I can't remember the exact name, but it was tucked away, far from the nearest town, hidden deep in the woods. It was one of the final stops on our road trip, and my family and I were staying there for the night. We were traveling with a small tour group by bus, and that evening, we had the option to either gather at the local tavern downstairs or take some time to ourselves. Since there was a wedding celebration going on downstairs, I decided to retreat to my room for some peace and quiet, while my parents went to join the others. After a long day of exploring old battlefields, I was looking forward to some solitude. I took a shower, relishing the silence, but something felt off. The bathroom door was closed, and the room was eerily still, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was standing just outside. I locked the door to the room, but still, an odd sense of being watched lingered. At first, I dismissed it as my imagination, but the feeling stuck with me, heavy in the air. When I stepped out of the bathroom, the room was empty, just as I had left it. Everything seemed normal, but that strange sensation remained, like someone was still there, watching me from the shadows. I tried to push it aside, distracting myself with a book, writing in my journal, but the feeling didn't go away. It was as if there was an invisible presence in the room, just behind me. Later that night, when my parents returned from the pub, we went to bed. My mom and dad shared a bed, while I took the other. The inn was a massive old building, with creaky floors and dark, narrow hallways. The kind of place that made you feel like it had 1,000 stories buried within its walls. Now, I'm a firm believer in spirits and the paranormal, and so is my mom. My dad, though, isn't convinced. He always says it's just our imagination playing tricks. But that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was different. Something was off. In the dead of night, I woke up, needing to adjust my hearing aids. At first, I thought it was just the quiet of the night playing tricks on me, but then I heard it. A soft, rhythmic breathing coming from the middle of the room. It wasn't my parents breathing. It was slower, heavier, as if something was standing right between their bed and mine. I froze in the dark, unsure of what I was hearing. It felt so real, so present. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself it was nothing. But that feeling didn't go away. My heart pounded in my chest, and once again, the hairs on my neck stood up. I could feel something, or someone, watching over us, standing still in the room with us. My eyes darted around in the darkness, but I saw nothing. I lay there, too scared to move, unsure of what to make of it. The next morning, as we made our way back to the tour bus, my mom quietly asked me, "Did you hear that extra breathing last night?" My heart skipped a beat. I nodded, and we both agreed it didn't sound like the usual snoring. I told her how I had felt like someone was in the room with us before they returned, but I hadn't said anything because I didn't want to sound ridiculous. The second night at the inn, I heard it again, that slow, deliberate breathing, like someone was still standing between the beds, watching us. It was unsettling, but somehow I managed to fall asleep, though the discomfort lingered, wrapping itself around me like a heavy fog. The rest of the tour was amazing, exploring old, historic landmarks, ghostly graveyards, and quiet, eerie towns. The graveyards, in particular, held a strange allure for me. There was something about them, the silence, the weight of history that seemed to settle in the air. As I wandered through them, taking in the old headstones and crumbling statues, I couldn't help but wonder if I felt the presence of spirits there too. Could the feeling I'd had in the inn have been a ghost, a soul tied to that old place, lingering in the shadows? Even now, I often think back to that trip. I wish I could remember the names of the places we visited, the faces of the friends we made along the way. The photos bring it all back. Stunning views of the countryside, the mystery of those ancient graveyards, and of course, the strange feeling of the extra body in the room. I still can't explain it, but I know what I felt. Could it have been a ghost? Or something else? What do you think? When I was in college, I rented a small apartment with 3 roommates. It wasn't an old building, and as far as we knew, nothing unusual had ever happened there. 2 of my roommates had lived there the previous year, and the girl in the room next to mine moved in at the same time I did. For the most part, everything seemed fine at first. But after we got settled in, things began to feel off. The 2 roommates who had been there before swore they hadn't experienced anything strange, which only made us more confused. It all started one evening when we were sitting in the living room, watching TV. The remote was placed underneath the coffee table, upside down, with the back off and, oddly, no batteries inside. The TV volume was set low, so I casually asked if anyone would turn it up. Nobody felt like getting up, so we all just sat there waiting. Then, out of nowhere, the volume bar on the screen began to move. It slowly increased on its own until it was at a comfortable level. We all froze and stared at the TV, unsure of what we were witnessing. It wasn't anything we could easily explain. After a moment of stunned silence, we figured if the apartment was haunted, it probably wasn't anything malicious. Maybe a prankster spirit, or one that just liked to keep us on edge. The following nights, I started hearing odd noises. These weren't the typical sounds you'd expect in a college apartment complex. No footsteps, no voices through the thin walls. Instead, they were mechanical, like the ticking of an old clock or a distant machine humming in the background. It wasn't constant, but every now and then, I'd hear a faint rhythmic ticking from within the walls, almost like something was shifting or turning inside them. But the strangest event happened one night in my bedroom. I was lying in bed, trying to fall asleep, when I heard a loud thud coming from the wall behind me. The sound was sharp, echoing through the quiet room. Almost immediately after, something even stranger began to happen. It started with a small shake. The mirrored closet door quivered slightly, and then I heard the sound of my bedroom door handle turning rapidly, like someone was trying to get in. The knob stopped, and before I could even process that, the bathroom door handle, right next to my bedroom door, started turning in the same frantic motion, like someone was trying to open it. By now, my heart was racing. I tried to calm myself, but then the VCR sitting next to the bathroom door powered on by itself, only to turn off a few seconds later. It wasn't a malfunction. Someone had deliberately pressed the button. Next, the window beside the VCR began to shake as if something outside was rattling it, and then another thud came from behind me, just like the first one. The strange sequence repeated itself 3 times in perfect succession. The closet door shaking, the door handles turning, the VCR flickering on and off, and the window vibrating. It was as though an invisible force was tracing a circle of activity around the room. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, everything stopped. Complete silence. I lay there, wide awake, unable to explain what had just happened. This wasn't like the usual creaks and groans of an old building. It felt intentional, as if the room itself was stuck in a loop, something methodical, almost mechanical. The strange events didn't continue after that night, though. No one else experienced anything like it in their rooms, and after that night, I didn't hear any more odd noises. The TV in the living room, however, still acted up from time to time. Eventually, I moved out of the apartment, and the strange occurrences slowly faded from memory. But even now, when I look back, I can't explain what happened. It's one of those experiences that doesn't quite fit into the realm of logic and reason. Was something in that apartment? Something old? Something left behind? Or was it just my mind playing tricks on me? Whatever it was, I like to think it was more curious than dangerous, but I'll never know for sure. I still find myself thinking back to that night, trying to piece together the strange pattern that unfolded. And sometimes I can't help but wonder, What if the pattern was something more than just coincidence? My sister Emily and I always called it the Hollow House. It was the address, but the house had stood for over a century, weathered and worn. I was 12, Emily was 14, and to be honest, we were terrified of that place. It wasn't just the creaky floorboards or the strange, unexplained sounds. It was the feeling. Something about it made you feel like you were never truly alone. Even our mom, who never put stock in ghost stories, had to have noticed something. She just wouldn't admit it. Despite having our own rooms, we always ended up sleeping together. It wasn't just for comfort. We needed to be near each other. The house had a way of making you feel like something was always lurking in the shadows, waiting for you to turn your back. The attic, especially, was a constant source of unease. Late at night, we'd hear heavy clunking noises coming from up there. Too loud to be animals. Too deliberate to be anything natural. No matter where we were in the house, you could always sense a presence. It was just there. My first experience happened when I was staying in Mom's room. Her bed was close to the door, just beside the staircase. I remember drifting off, the house creaking around me when I heard it. The unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps on the wooden stairs. It was the same noise I make when I walk down the stairs now, in my boots. But that night, I froze. No one was upstairs. I lay there, heart pounding, too scared to move. I couldn't explain it. The second encounter happened to Emily. She was sitting on her bed reading. Our beds were simple, just mattresses on the floor, and there was a chair next to her bed, left empty, or so we thought. Emily looked up and saw a little girl, dressed in faded yellow pajamas, sitting in that chair. The girl had a deep, raw cut around her neck, as though her throat had been slashed. The little girl locked eyes with Emily and began telling her a story. She said she and her baby sister had been killed by their father. She said she had been strangled and her sister shot. Emily was too shaken to remember if she mentioned her mother. But the most chilling part, the girl said that her father's room used to be Emily's. Then came the night Emily and our older cousin, Frankie, were sitting in the living room. A baby's cry echoed through the house. But there were no babies, there hadn't been for years. Still, we followed the sound, drawn upstairs. When we reached the top of the stairs, we saw it. A baby, crawling across the floor. Frozen in shock, we watched as it moved toward the bathroom. But when it turned around to come back, we saw something that made our blood run cold. The baby had a huge, gaping wound on its stomach, soaking through its tiny blue gown with dark, dripping blood. It was like something out of a nightmare. An innocent child, but with an impossible injury. The fourth encounter was mine, and it still haunts me. I was sitting halfway out of my window, sneaking a cigarette. I know I was a rebellious kid when I looked back into my room, and that's when I saw him. A man, standing motionless in my room, staring straight at me. His face was twisted with an expression I can't forget. He was holding a double-barrel shotgun, cocked and resting against his left arm. He wore old-fashioned clothing, worn-out overalls, a stained undershirt, and boots that looked like they belonged to another time. And when he moved his head, it was like his image couldn't keep up with him, like he was out of sync with the world. He locked eyes with me, his gaze cold and empty, and said in a voice that sent shivers down my spine, "Get out of my damn house." And then, without another word, he vanished. To this day, I still don't know what happened in that house. Nothing like it has ever happened again, and I hope it never does. Was it just our overactive imaginations? Maybe, but I don't think so. I'm usually skeptical, grounded in logic. Yet what we saw was real enough for more than one of us to experience. Maybe we were seeing what we expected to see, or maybe something else was there with us all along. Either way, the memories of that place, those strange, unsettling encounters, still linger. I don't think I'll ever truly shake them. Hey everyone, I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. When I was 13, my friends and I decided to mess around with a Ouija board. At the time, it seemed like a harmless, spooky game to pass the time. But looking back, I can't shake the feeling that it triggered a chain of events that would haunt me for years. A day or two after the game, I was in my bedroom when I started hearing someone calling my name. The voice seemed to drift in through the open window, faint yet persistent, almost carried by the wind. It was unsettling, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I went to the kitchen, where my mom, her boyfriend, and my little brother were, and told them what I was hearing. Together, we went outside to check, but there was no one around. That was just the beginning. Over the next week, I started hearing scratching sounds coming from above my room, even though our house was a single-story ranch on a quiet street in Silver Springs. Then the strange things started happening in the hallway. The walls seemed to warp, as if they were bending toward me like they were alive. It was subtle at first, but over time, the feeling grew, and my unease turned into dread. The most disturbing part, though, came next. I began drawing strange symbols, pentagrams, though I had no idea what they meant at the time, on my hands and stomach. It was as if I was being compelled to do it, and I felt this strange sense of power, almost like I was untouchable. But when I looked into the mirror one day, I saw something that froze me to the core. A goat's head staring back at me, its eyes burning with malice. I quickly turned away, but the image stayed with me, haunting my every thought. One night, I woke up in bed, unable to move, paralyzed. All I could do was move my eyes, and the terror I felt was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. I could hear screaming and crying from all around me, though I couldn't tell where it was coming from. Then it felt like I was floating, like my body was being lifted from the bed before being yanked back down. Everything went black, and then, in an instant, everything turned bright white. I heard a voice, faint and distant. I couldn't understand the words, but it sounded like a plea to leave me alone. When I woke up, everything was still, but the terror was far from over. We moved to a new house on the outskirts of town, hoping for a fresh start. For a couple of years, it felt like everything was back to normal. But then, the feelings returned. One night, I woke up to find a ghostly figure of a woman hovering above me. Frozen with fear, I threw the covers over my head and stayed there, too terrified to move. The bedroom always felt wrong, unwelcoming, cold. Even walking past the spare room next to mine gave me chills. Everyone who visited noticed it too. A few weeks later, I had some friends over for band practice. As we were jamming, a horrible, unnatural sound came from behind our drummer's kit. He jumped up, terrified, and we all froze, shaken to the core. The noise was loud and eerie, unlike anything we'd ever heard before. To make it even worse, I saw the goat's head again, this time near the recording equipment. When I told my friends what I saw, one of them nervously admitted that he had drawn a pentagram on the recorder earlier. None of us had seen it before, and the revelation chilled me to the bone. One evening, while I was practicing alone in my room, the familiar sense of terror washed over me once more. This time, it was stronger than ever. Desperate and scared, I started singing out to God, even though I wasn't particularly religious. The fear only grew, and I finally shouted aloud, "That's enough." I put my guitar down and walked into the spare room, the one that had always felt off. As soon as I stepped inside, it was like an invisible force slammed into me, pushing through my chest from the front and then from behind. I was knocked to the floor, feeling something unseen grabbing at me. Panicked, I ran out of the house and bolted across the street to my friend's house. After that night, I made the decision to get baptized. It felt like the only way to take back control, to reclaim my sense of safety. Strangely, after the baptism, everything stopped. The terror, the strange happenings, everything. I haven't had a single unsettling experience since. Now, as I approach my 32nd birthday, I still don't fully understand what happened during those years, but I'll never forget the darkness that followed me during that time. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. I've been dealing with strange occurrences for as long as I can remember, since I was about 12 or 13 years old. Now, at 21, those experiences have shaped the way I view the unknown. Back in my teenage years, my friends and I would mess around with things like Ouija boards and try seances just to get a thrill. At the time, we didn't know what we were dealing with. Looking back, I realize how naive we were. Eventually, we stopped because we couldn't deny the strange things happening around us. When I was 16, my family moved into an old farmhouse on the outskirts of Silver Springs, a small town in Oregon. It was a place my uncle had lived in years before. Not long after we unpacked, things started to get weird. One day, when I was home alone, I heard what sounded like a light switch flicking on and off in the next room. I knew immediately it wasn't just the house creaking. It felt like a presence. But it wasn't threatening, not at first. Over the years, I came to realize that there was more than just one spirit in that house. Some of the presences were calm, almost comforting, but others left me with a feeling of deep unease. It was like there were different entities, each with their own energy. My friends who came to visit often mentioned how eerie the house felt. They said it was like someone was always watching. One of them even claimed to feel the presence of an old man, something I always sensed too. It was strange, almost like we shared the same feeling. I didn't stay in the main house with my family. Instead, I lived in a small cottage-like bungalow behind it. 3 years ago, things started getting more intense. It felt like there was something always there, watching me. I could never pinpoint exactly where, but it always came from one corner of the room. I'd hear cracking sounds coming from that spot, and it became harder to sleep. It wasn't just the creepy atmosphere. It felt oppressive, like I didn't belong there. Then came one of the strangest events about a year and a half ago. I woke up one night in my bed, and for a moment, I thought I was still dreaming. I saw a woman, an angry, hostile figure, walk toward me and slap me across the face. I woke up confused, holding my face, unsure whether it was a dream or something physical. Either way, it was unsettling. Things kept happening. Items like my TV remote would vanish, and no matter how much I searched, they never turned up. Water droplets would fall on me for no reason. At one point, I even started sleepwalking, which I'd never done before. It felt like the house itself was getting more hostile, and I couldn't make sense of it. In the last year, the activity in the bungalow has escalated even further. It's almost like the spirit doesn't want me to sleep. Right when I'm about to drift off, I hear a loud thud, or something crashes nearby. I've even woken up to find bruises on my knuckles with no explanation. It's as though whatever's there is trying to hurt me, though I don't understand why. The past 2 weeks have been the worst. It feels like the spirit is angry, but I'm not sure why. I've heard footsteps circling my bed, the sound of guitar strings being plucked, blinds moving on their own, and loud bangs coming from the walls. I was so scared one night, I decided to sleep inside the main house. But the thought of giving in like that felt like surrendering to the spirit. So I went back to the bungalow the next night. It was calm, but not for long. Out of frustration, I sat up in bed one night and muttered, "Do you want to start, huh?" Almost immediately, a poster ripped off the wall, and things started flying out from under my bed. I didn't spend another night in the bungalow after that. 2 nights ago, I decided to smudge the bungalow, using sage to cleanse the space. I focused on the corner where I always felt watched. That night, there was a rare peace, but the next night, the activity returned. Around 8:30 p.m., I went to bed, only to hear tapping on the windows, running footsteps, and the unmistakable sound of things being thrown across the room. That night, I couldn't stay there. I ended up sleeping inside again. Even in the main house, things happen, but they don't feel as directed. Last night, while sleeping in my mom's room, I woke up with a distinct feeling of something hovering over my face. It disappeared as quickly as it came, but then, later in the night, I woke up twice to the sensation of being shaken awake. It's like whatever is in that house wants to keep me unsettled. I've tried everything, talking to the spirits, asking them to leave, smudging, even laying salt around my windows. But nothing has worked. Now, with a move to a new house coming up. I'm terrified that whatever is haunting me will follow. I'll be living alone, and the idea of bringing this with me, it's overwhelming. From a young age, I had an intense fear of the dark, not because of what I couldn't see, but because of what I could. Figures would emerge from the shadows, human shapes and creatures alike, and faces would materialize so vividly at the foot of my bed, almost as if waiting for me to fall asleep. For years, I convinced myself that it was all just tricks of the mind, the result of an overactive imagination. But then one night, everything changed. That night made me wonder if what we call illusions could, in fact, be something much more real. It was 2002, and I was 11 years old when my first real encounter occurred. At the time, my family and I lived in a small, isolated house in the middle of nowhere, just outside a quiet town in the Appalachian foothills of West Virginia. We had been living there for over 2 years, but it wasn't until 4 months and that I began to suspect there was something wrong with the house, something beyond the ordinary. It was a late evening, around 10 or 11 p.m., when I couldn't fall asleep. My mind raced with thoughts, and I decided to turn on my light in hopes it would calm me down. I pulled the blankets tightly around me and turned toward the door. I lay there, staring into the dim, shadowy hallway for about 10 minutes when I saw her. A woman stood in the doorway. At first, I thought it was my mom, but as my eyes adjusted, I realized something was terribly off. She was dressed in an old, faded gown, something out of the 1800s. Her clothing seemed completely out of place in the modern house I lived in. What was even more unsettling was the red hue that seemed to bathe her entire figure, as if illuminated by an otherworldly light. Before I could process what I was seeing, she reached toward the light switch and turned off my lamp. The room fell into darkness, and she glided closer to me. Her movements weren't natural. She seemed to float, her feet barely touching the ground. As she came nearer, I saw her face, her eyes locked onto mine, with a cold, angry glare that sent a chill through me. An overwhelming sense of distrust washed over me, as though she meant me harm. I opened my mouth to scream, but before I could, she vanished, disappearing as quickly as she had appeared. Just as I started to catch my breath, another figure emerged. This time, it was a man, dressed in attire that seemed to come from the same era as the woman, but there was a difference. He had a soft, almost ethereal glow about him. The moment I saw him, I felt a sudden sense of peace, as if his very presence was meant to protect me. He turned the light back on, smiled warmly at me, and then, just as suddenly, he vanished as well. For months, this strange pattern continued. Every night, the woman would appear, and the man would follow shortly after, chasing her away. Over time, the man's appearances grew more frequent, and he seemed to become more comforting, almost like a protector. The last time I saw him, he didn't disappear immediately. Instead, he sat at the edge of my bed, offering me a gentle smile, as if assuring me that everything would be okay. After that night, he stopped coming, but his presence never truly left. Even now, I sometimes feel a soft, reassuring touch on my shoulder or my back, as if he's still there, watching over me. I like to think of him as my guardian angel, a quiet protector who still lingers in the shadows, reminding me that I'm never truly alone. When I was 4, we had a sweet little Chihuahua named Tommy. He was my sister's dog, but everyone in the family adored him. One day, my other sister accidentally let him outside. Before any of us could catch him, Tommy darted down the road, and tragically, he was hit by a car. I still remember seeing him lying there on the pavement, and the heartbreak I felt in that moment is something I'll never forget. I cried so hard, and even now, 20 years later, the memory still brings tears to my eyes. A kind old man came up to me and offered me a plush Snoopy to comfort me, but I couldn't accept it. I remember saying, "It's not my doggy." To this day, there's a certain Elton John song I can't listen to. It was playing when Tommy passed, and every time I hear it, the grief rushes back. After my brothers buried him in the yard, we started hearing frantic scratching at the back door. It sounded exactly like Tommy's little paws scraping against the wood, and at that age it terrified me. My mom, worried that somehow Tommy might be trying to come back, had my brothers check his grave. The dirt was undisturbed. Every time we checked the door, there was nothing there, but the scratching continued night after night. Even now, I still miss him, and the love I had for that little dog will stay with me forever. Years passed, and I thought I was past the heartbreak. But about 5 years ago, I had another deep loss. My Chihuahua mix, Foxy, had a litter of puppies, and while they all found loving homes, one little pup stayed behind. She was a tiny black and white patchwork pup we named Moo Moo. Everyone loved her, but strangely, no one ever wanted to adopt her. They'd pick her up, play with her, but then gently put her back down. In the end, Moo Moo stayed with us. When she was just a few months old, Moo Moo started acting strangely. She seemed tired, but with the hot weather, I thought she might just be overexerted. Her condition worsened quickly. One night, she suddenly began convulsing uncontrollably. I rushed her to the vet, holding her close, whispering comforting words as she struggled. But no matter how hard she fought, the seizures wouldn't stop. The next morning, the vet gave me the heart-wrenching news. Moo Moo had passed away. I wasn't there for her in her final moments, and that thought tears me apart. The vet assured me that Moo Moo had only a slim chance of survival, but I still wish I could have held her one last time. We buried her in a box lined with flowers, and I kept a small clipping of her fur in a heart-shaped pendant. That pendant now sits in a soapstone box on my shelf, beside a small statue of Jesus. Sometimes I leave dog treats near it, imagining that Moo Moo would love them. Last night I found myself thinking about Moo Moo again. The sadness came flooding back, and I cried. As I held the pendant, touching the small tuft of her fur inside, I remembered her big, loving eyes and her playful nature. Suddenly, I felt an overwhelming urge to wear the pendant to bed. It was as if Moo Moo was somehow urging me to keep her close. I couldn't sleep until I finally slipped it on. The moment I did, a chill swept over me, an icy cold, like an Arctic breeze passing through the room. Then, I started hearing soft puppy sounds. I could hear tiny paws scampering across the carpet, light panting, and the playful energy of a pup running around. I knew it couldn't have been Sweetie, her sister, because she was outside in the yard with her mom. In the middle of the night, I woke again to the same sounds, the familiar panting, the tiny claws skittering on the floor, and the unmistakable presence of a playful puppy. At first, I felt a twinge of fear, but soon, a sense of peace washed over me. I realized that Moo Moo was still with me somehow. Maybe she just wanted to join Sweetie and me, or perhaps she was feeling a little jealous, wanting to be part of our bedtime routine. I can't explain why Moo Moo chose that moment to visit, but it was a comfort. It felt like she was reassuring me that she was okay, that our bond was still strong. I know this might sound strange, but I've always had a deep connection with dogs. The visits from Tommy and Moo Moo, though bittersweet, have been a beautiful reminder of the love that can transcend even death. Every moment they've stayed by my side is something I cherish deeply. Not long after the unsettling experience with the little old lady, I packed up and moved to a small town in Oregon, where I landed a job as a clerk in a well-known department store, name withheld. The building, a century-old brick structure, had stood on Main Street since the 1800s, its walls rich with history. My office was tucked away in a cramped, almost claustrophobic space at the back of the building, barely larger than a bathroom. It was isolated, with empty rooms above and an old, dusty storage area across the hall filled with forgotten office supplies and outdated technology. In my first week on the job, strange things started happening. My coworker, Sarah, was on vacation, so I had the office all to myself. At first, I noticed a figure, a man in a faded blue boiler suit, standing in the corner of my eye. Each time I turned to look, he'd vanish. I told myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But soon after, objects began disappearing, and I began hearing faint voices coming from the deserted offices above. Sometimes, I'd hear the distinct sound of an old-fashioned telephone ringing, or the echo of footsteps pacing the hall, but when I checked, no one was ever there. I kept these occurrences to myself, afraid that I might sound crazy, but when Sarah came back, I finally confided in her. To my surprise, she admitted she'd experienced similar things. "You heard that too?" she asked. The relief I felt in that moment was overwhelming. At least I wasn't losing my mind. The odd events became part of the daily routine. The man in the blue boiler suit seemed like an inevitable fixture, always standing there with his hands in his pockets. The smell of cigarette smoke would linger in the air, even though smoking had been banned in the building for years. Occasionally, I'd catch a whiff of perfume that didn't belong to anyone in the office, something sweet and floral, but entirely unfamiliar. And sometimes, whispers would float past me, soft, almost imperceptible, as though someone was standing right behind me, but when I turned around, no one was there. But nothing compared to the night I'll never forget. It was a cold, rainy evening in mid-November. My boss had asked me to stay late, offering extra pay for the extra hours, money I could use for my weekend plans. By 9 p.m., I decided to take a break and explore the upper floors of the building. Armed with a flashlight, I climbed the narrow staircase that creaked with every step, each groan of the old wood sending a chill down my spine. When I reached the top, the hallway was draped in darkness. I opened the door to one of the offices and was immediately hit by a strange, almost suffocating feeling, as if the room was crowded with invisible people who didn't want me there. The air felt heavy, charged, as though it was waiting for me to leave. I backed out quickly, closing the door with a soft thud. As I continued down the hallway, I came across what seemed like an old ballroom, a relic of the past. The room had once been a popular spot for social gatherings, especially during the 1920s and 1930s. To my shock, I saw a man and a woman, dressed in period clothing, waltzing silently to music that only they could hear. I stood frozen for what seemed like forever, unable to tear my eyes away. But as the panic set in, I turned and bolted back to my office, my heart pounding with every step. I finished my work that night, shaken but determined to get through it. But the strangeness didn't end there. A few days later, I was in the elevator when it suddenly stopped mid-floor. An eerie presence filled the small space with me, something I couldn't see but could definitely feel. When the elevator doors finally opened, I stepped out, only to feel an invisible hand gripping my elbow. I screamed and tried to shake it off, startling my boss and a few other managers who were nearby. They watched, wide-eyed, as I struggled with something I couldn't explain, something that seemed determined to hold me back. Later, I found out that the man in the blue boiler suit was the original owner of the building, and that the very office I worked in had once been his. When I was 7 years old, my family lived in a quiet town called Silver Springs, a small place tucked away in the hills of Oregon. Looking back, I think that's when everything started, though I didn't realize it at the time. It was like something unseen had taken root back then, something I'm still trying to understand. Even as a child, I had the oddest feeling that I was being watched. I remember lying in bed at night, twisting myself into strange, uncomfortable positions because I thought I had to look cute. It wasn't just a whim. I felt like there were eyes on me, even though I couldn't see anyone there. Something about the stillness of the room felt off. By the time I was 16, my parents had gone through a rough divorce, and I had moved with my mom to a small 2-bedroom apartment in the suburbs of Seattle. Things started feeling unsettling once again. Mom had found this huge antique mirror at a flea market, and she decided to hang it in my room. Not long after, things began to change. The air around me grew cold, colder than the rest of the apartment. The mold spread across the ceiling faster than I could wipe it down. And I started to feel like I wasn't alone, like something was there with me, invisible but palpable. At first, it was subtle, a slight chill in the air, a whisper of something that could have been the wind. But that didn't last. The presence quickly grew stronger. The atmosphere in my room became dense, almost suffocating, like it didn't want me there at all. It was as if the walls themselves were closing in on me. I couldn't bear being in my room anymore, so I started sleeping on the couch, only going in to crack the window open or turn on the heater to try to fight off the damp, suffocating air. By 2007, this feeling had followed me everywhere I went. One night, I stayed at my boyfriend's house. I woke up gasping for air, choking on nothing, the room around me freezing cold, though the air conditioning was off. As soon as I fully woke up, the choking stopped and the cold lifted, but it left me shaken. The following Christmas, I was at my boyfriend's house again, washing dishes in his tiny kitchen. The house was quiet, but I could feel it, the sensation of someone standing just behind me, like when you're in a grocery store and you can sense someone in line behind you. I turned quickly, but no one was there. The feeling didn't go away. It lingered, a heavy presence pressing down on me, but there was nothing to see. I kept washing the dishes, trying to ignore it, but the moment I turned my attention to a stubborn spot on a plate, the feeling changed. It was as if something, or someone, rushed at me. I screamed in shock, spilling hot water all over my hands. My heart was racing, and for a moment, I couldn't even think clearly. I've never been so frightened in my life. Now it's 2009, and things have gotten so much worse. It's like the presence is following me no matter where I go. Whether I'm at home, at my roommate's place, or even at work, it's always there, just watching. When I'm alone, it feels unbearable. It's like something is waiting, lurking in the shadows, trying to hurt me. The fear is so intense that sometimes I want to run away, but there's no place left to run. What's even worse is that now, it's starting to creep into moments when I'm not alone. Yesterday, for the first time, I felt it even while my roommate was at home. Normally, having someone nearby makes it bearable, but not this time. It was as if its presence had grown stronger, more persistent, pushing against the very air in the room. I'm losing my grip. I used to love being alone. It was my time to recharge, to be with my thoughts. But now, the idea of being by myself fills me with dread. I can feel it in my body, the prickling on my skin, my heart pounding in my chest, and a wave of pure terror that seems to come from nowhere. It's overwhelming. Last night, I considered seeing a therapist. Maybe that's what I need. I can't keep living like this, constantly looking over my shoulder. If anyone out there has gone through something like this, or if you have any idea what could help, please reach out. I don't know how much longer I can take this. I grew up in a small town in North Carolina. It's not important which one, but let's just say it was one of those places where everyone knows everyone else, and things tend to stay quiet. Our next-door neighbor, however, was anything but. For as long as I can remember, my grandmother never told us why she hated our family so much. Whatever the reason, it was clear she held a grudge, one she never bothered to explain. Yet despite that, she was always kind to us, as if she were trying to make up for something. Even now, I have no idea what started the feud. One afternoon, my aunt came home from school, complaining of an empty stomach. The neighbor, sitting on her porch, called out to her. She asked if my aunt could help her with something she couldn't move, some heavy object she needed assistance with. My aunt, being the kind-hearted person she was, agreed to help, and she walked toward the neighbor's house. I tried to stop her, but just as she was leaving, I felt something push me back, something I couldn't explain. There was no one near me, but it was like an invisible force shoved me aside. Panicked, I ran to my grandmother and told her about it. By the time we made it outside, it was already too late. When we found my aunt, she was walking back from the neighbor's porch, holding a sandwich in her hand. My grandmother took it away from her quickly, but my aunt had already eaten most of it. That night, around midnight, we were all woken up by a strange, burning smell. I rushed to wake everyone up, and we began searching the house for the source. The smell led us straight to my aunt's room. The door was locked, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't get it open. When my uncle arrived, he managed to force the door open. The look on his face was one I'll never forget, like he'd seen something that no human should ever see. I grabbed his hand, and he snapped out of it, but when I turned to look into the room, I was frozen in place. There, sitting on the bed, was my aunt, but her face, it wasn't hers anymore. Her features were distorted, as if something malevolent was trying to break through. It was the most horrifying thing I'd ever witnessed. Over the next few days, things only got worse. My aunt would pass out for no reason, and during those moments, it was like something else would take over. I could feel it, a mix of spirits inside her, trying to emerge. There was the spirit of a little girl, a man, a few demons, and one, in particular, that claimed to be the devil himself. I was terrified to be alone with her, but no matter where I went, I always ended up by her side when she fainted. The little girl spirit was persistent, but there was one entity that seemed to target me directly. One day, as I was walking by her room, she suddenly grabbed me. Her face was no longer human, twisted and dark. Her voice was that of an evil man. I screamed so loudly, I thought I might collapse from the sheer terror. My grandmother heard me and rushed to my aid, calling my uncles to help. They managed to pull my aunt off me, but before they could fully get her away, she leaned in close and whispered something that chilled me to my core. "He knows who you are. Watch yourself. One day you won't be so lucky." The fear consumed me. That Sunday, I went to church, hoping to find some solace. I joined the choir, hoping that the peace of the music would calm my nerves. I told the priest everything that had been happening, and he offered to help. He gave me a small vial of holy water and told me it would protect me. The next day, the priest came to our house with the intention of helping, but when he reached the front door, he stopped dead in his tracks. He turned to my grandmother and said, "I can't go in there. It's too strong for me. I need more help." He told her that one of the demons wasn't just any demon. It was the devil himself, and he wouldn't leave without my aunt's soul. As he left, he mentioned that he'd heard the entity scream at him, claiming my aunt's soul had been offered to it, and it wasn't going anywhere until it had it. The priest, deeply concerned, returned the next day with 3 other people to help, but even with their combined efforts, they were powerless. Nothing changed. My aunt remained the same, possessed by the darkness. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and months into years. This continued for 2 whole years. It felt like living in a never-ending nightmare. To this day, I still don't know what happened to my aunt. None of my family will speak of it, but I can't be near her without feeling that presence. Something dark and evil that's still there, watching me. It's like that demon, the one who warned me, is still lingering, waiting. For the past 2 years, I've been haunted by one question. Who is my roommate? Is it someone I once knew, or something else entirely? It all began after the tragic death of my best friend, Sarah, on December 23rd, 2005. Ever since then, there's been a presence in my room, a feeling I can't quite explain. I used to think I was alone in my space, but now that's not the case. My last memory of her is from the day before Christmas break, the last day of school. Truth be told, neither of us were the most popular kids in school. We struggled to fit in, something we often talked about. We only had one class together, but I'd see her between classes or during breaks. I never hung out with her outside of school, and now I regret that. On the 22nd of December, just one day before Christmas, Sarah and her mom were in a car accident while driving to her uncle's house for the holidays. Her dad had stayed home for some reason, something I can't quite remember, but I often thank God that he did. Sarah had always been treated unfairly by some of the other girls. At least 2 out of 5 of them made fun of her behind her back. The rest of us tried to stay out of it, but we could see it wasn't right. After the holidays, the funeral came. It hit me harder than I had expected. At the service, the 2 girls who had been so cruel to her actually spoke, and I was stunned by what they said. It felt wrong, and in that moment, I spoke up, saying something that felt right for the first time in a long time. Her family and friends seemed to appreciate it. That Christmas was unlike any I'd ever known. My aunts tried to cheer me up, but I just couldn't shake the heaviness. My dogs tried to make me laugh. My parents tried to comfort me. Even my other relatives came over for Christmas dinner, which I usually love. But this year, I couldn't bring myself to eat. For 3 days, I hadn't been able to. A month later, something strange started happening. I began hearing a voice. It would whisper when I was feeling low, "Don't be sad." When we returned to school, I heard it again, this time when my teacher asked where Sarah was. The voice said, "Go on. Tell her. It'll be okay." And so I did. I told the teacher about Sarah. She left the room for a while, even though we were in the middle of class. I'll never forget the looks my classmates gave me. Some of them asked, "Why did you tell her now?" When I got home that day, I cried like I hadn't in weeks. But as I sat there, sobbing, I felt something. A hand, warm and comforting, gently rested on my back. And I heard the voice again, "You'll be okay." 2 years have passed now. I don't hear the words anymore, but the presence is still there. It's as if Sarah's spirit never really left, though I can't be sure. I keep a picture of her and her parents by my bedside, and whenever I glance at it, I feel like she's still watching over me. Sometimes it's comforting to think that she might still be nearby, but other times I'm not so certain. Like just 2 nights ago, I woke up at 3 a.m. to see a shadowy figure sitting in my chair, spinning around. That's the part that unsettles me. It took me an entire year to start moving on from the accident. Even now, it feels like I'm still carrying it with me. I still have all the newspaper clippings, the ones about the crash, and the photographs from the papers. It's all a reminder of that time. And sometimes, I wonder if my other friends are experiencing the same thing, that they too have this mysterious roommate, this presence watching over us. My best friend even once drew a picture of Sarah, calling her our guardian angel. Maybe that's why she's still here, still with us. It was a little after 1:30 a.m. on a Saturday when I had a few friends over for a sleepover. We had spent the whole night camping in my backyard, enjoying each other's company under the starry sky. We were laughing and chatting when I decided I needed a quick break. "Hey, I'll be right back. I just need to use the bathroom," I said, getting up from the campfire. I made my way into the house and up the stairs to the second floor. That's when I first heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, and echoing from below. I thought maybe my friends were trying to mess with me, so I rushed to my room, grabbed a mask, and waited. The footsteps grew closer. I positioned myself at the top of the stairs, jumped out, and screamed, ready to scare them. But when I looked down, no one was there. The footsteps didn't stop. They kept going, now coming from upstairs. I figured it must have been my parents. I went up to check, but when I reached the second floor, again, there was no one around. I entered my parents' bedroom. Both of them were sound asleep. Confused and a little unsettled, I ran out onto the balcony to check on my friends. They were all in their tents, still fast asleep. My heart began to race. Could it have been a burglar? The thought made me uneasy. I rushed back into my parents' room and woke them up, telling them about the footsteps. My mom grabbed her gun from the closet, while my dad checked all the doors. They were all locked. They reassured me it was just my imagination, that I was probably tired. I wasn't so sure, but I agreed. Maybe they were right. I went back outside, rejoining my friends, but the unease wouldn't leave. We stayed up until about 5 a.m., and I decided to stretch my legs. Everyone else was still asleep, and for a moment, the silence of the night felt overwhelming. As I stretched, I glanced up at the house. That's when I saw it. A dark figure standing in one of the windows, staring down at me. I froze, my blood running cold. I couldn't tell if it was just the shadows playing tricks on me or if I was imagining things, but the figure was unmistakable. Slowly, I stood up, hoping to get a better look, but as soon as I moved, it vanished. I told my friends about what I saw, but they didn't believe me. They laughed it off, chalking it up to my imagination. Still, the feeling lingered, a sense that something wasn't quite right. A few months later, we threw another party. And once again, the same thing happened. This time, my parents saw it too. Concerned, they called in a psychic to look into the house. After some time, she gave us a chilling revelation. She said the house had once belonged to a man in the 1700s, and during one of his own parties, He had fallen off the balcony to his death. The psychic claimed his spirit was angry because we were having parties in his house. Things only escalated when I was around 15. We had another party, and my friend went to use the bathroom. He stepped inside, but when he tried to close the door, it slammed shut behind him. We heard him shouting, but the door was locked. When we finally managed to open it, he was covered in scratches, visibly shaken, and swearing that something had attacked him. We didn't stay another minute. We packed up and left that night. Not long after we moved out, the church next door purchased the house. They turned it into a home for the priest. I guess they must have known something we didn't, because they performed an exorcism there. Since then, there haven't been any more reports of the ghost, but I'll never forget the feeling of something watching me from that house. Even now, I can't shake the thought, is it really gone? I've had my share of strange, unexplainable experiences with spirits, but none have been quite as memorable as the encounters I've had with cats. In fact, every spirit I've met has been feline in nature, and over time, I've developed a deep comfort in their presence. The cat I want to tell you about is named Whiskers. He lived a full life for nearly 10 years before something unexpected started to go wrong. Over the course of several months, Whiskers started to lose function in his back end. The once playful, independent cat could no longer move around as freely as he once did. It didn't take long for us to find out that he had a tumor on his spine, and sadly, there was nothing we could do to save him. During his final days, Whiskers made a spot for himself in the bathroom, lying on a plush rug where we kept him comfortable. He had always been a bit skittish, the kind of cat who only liked to be touched when he was ready. If he jumped onto your lap, you could pet him, but if you tried to chase him or pick him up, he was gone in a heartbeat. That was just his way. The night before the vet was scheduled to come and put him down, I found myself sitting with him in the bathroom. My adopted sister was in the other bathroom, so I took a seat on the toilet, quietly keeping him company. Out of nowhere, Whiskers dragged himself over using just his front paws and gently nudged his head against my leg. Surprised, I bent down and stroked his fur. I got off the toilet, crouched down beside him, and continued petting him. For the first time, he fully accepted my presence, and I knew it was a special moment. It was both heartbreaking and comforting at the same time, like we were saying goodbye in the only way he could. Fast forward to the 1-year anniversary of Whiskers' passing. That afternoon, I walked into the bathroom, and there he was, lying once again on the same plush rug where he had spent his last moments. I blinked, thinking it was just my eyes playing tricks on me, but when I looked again, he was still there, clear as day. I stepped into the room, closed the door behind me, and stayed a few feet away, unsure of what I was seeing, but he didn't go anywhere. I started talking to him softly, just telling him how nice it was to see him again. I didn't expect any sort of response, but it felt right to speak to him. I didn't think of him as a ghost cat, just as Whiskers in that same familiar space we used to share. As I sat down on the edge of the bathtub, he slowly got up and moved toward me, walking across the rug. It was strange because his paws didn't sink into the plush fibers like they should have. It was something I hadn't really thought about before, but I noticed it. Whiskers came closer, nuzzling his cheek gently against my leg, just like he had the night before he passed. For a brief, surreal moment, I almost expected him to vanish right then and there. I'd never interacted with a spirit for this long before, and the feeling of his fur against my leg was so real and soft, it was like he was still here. It almost made my heart catch in my throat. Was he saying goodbye? My mind raced. I didn't want him to leave. I had never gotten the chance to hold him while he was alive, and now, it felt like I was finally being given that chance. I whispered softly, asking him to stay. It sounds strange, I know, but it felt like Whiskers was still so much a part of this house, and I wasn't ready to let go of that feeling. Even though he had passed away, he had always been with us in some way. That night, I whispered a quiet happy birthday to him, hoping the winds would carry it wherever he was. As he rubbed his head against my ankle, I realized he wasn't going anywhere, and the tension in my chest started to ease. Without even thinking, I reached down to pet his head. And that's when it happened. I swear, I felt it. The softness of his fur under my fingertips, like he was still shedding. It felt so real, as if he was physically there. I continued petting him, almost in disbelief at what was happening. But when I looked up, ready to kneel down and pet him the way I used to, he was gone. Just like that. The sensation of his warmth and the softness of his fur lingered in the air, and I stood there, frozen, as the silence of the bathroom settled in around me. It was a shock, to be honest. I had hoped he'd stay just a little longer. I had never gotten to hold him when he was alive. He was always too independent for that. But that night, it felt like he was offering me a chance to experience a closeness I had missed. I didn't get to hold him, but I will always carry the memory of his soft fur beneath my fingers, the closeness we shared in those last moments. Whiskers was a special cat, even in life. And now, even as a spirit, he brings a sense of peace and comfort to our home. There are other ghost cats here, Fluff and Smokey, but Whiskers will always be the one who left the deepest paw print on my heart. I know he's still around somewhere in this house, just waiting for the right moment to show himself again. Hey everyone, I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. It was one of those nights where everything felt frozen in time, the kind where the world outside seems to stand still, and the only noise you hear is the gentle tapping of rain against the window. I had just finished a long day, the exhaustion creeping over me as I prepared to settle into bed. My room, the same one I'd lived in for as long as I could remember, felt unusually still tonight, the kind of stillness that made the silence feel almost too thick. I tried not to think too much about it. After all, it was just a normal evening. The rain was calming, and the world outside was wrapped in a soft, comforting shroud of darkness. I tucked myself in, the rhythmic sound of raindrops beginning to lull me into a sense of security. But as I lay there, something felt off. Something in the air around me was different. It wasn't until much later, much too late, that I realized I wasn't alone. I had just started to drift off when I heard it. A soft, almost imperceptible sound. At first, I thought it was just the wind, or maybe a branch brushing against the window. But then, it came again, a faint creak, from somewhere near the far corner of my room. My heart skipped a beat. Was someone else in here with me? I quickly dismissed the thought. It's just the house settling, I reassured myself. It happens all the time. But still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I pulled the blanket up higher, my eyes nervously scanning the dark corners of the room. The rain continued its calming rhythm outside, but it couldn't drown out the gnawing feeling in my chest. My thoughts kept drifting back to that sound. Then it came again, closer this time. A soft, almost imperceptible whisper, like someone breathing just behind me. I froze. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. It was as if my body was telling me, "You're not alone here." My mind raced. Maybe it was the wind. Maybe I was just overthinking it. But deep down, I knew something wasn't quite right. I lay there, my heart pounding, trying to convince myself that it was nothing. But the feeling of being watched refused to leave. It hung in the air like a weight I couldn't shake off. I couldn't help but wonder, was it the house? Or was something else here with me? Had anyone else felt it? Maybe my roommate or some of my friends had experienced something similar. I thought about how strange it all felt. The silence, the heavy tension, the way the rain now seemed distant, like an afterthought to the growing unease settling in around me. The whispers didn't come again, but the room still felt cold, like something was lingering just outside my view. The rain, once so calming, now felt almost foreign, its sound too far away to comfort me. I sat up slowly, my body tense. I wasn't sure whether to stay or get up, but the pull of the unknown felt stronger than the weight of my exhaustion. What was happening? Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, Let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Almost 20 years ago, my family had just moved to the small town of Pine Lake, Oregon, after immigrating from Indonesia when I was 9 years old. At the time, our household included my mom, my younger brother, my grandma, my cousin, and an Indonesian housekeeper. My mom's side of the family was Chinese-Indonesian, and like many immigrant families, we had a busy life trying to adjust to a new country, so we occasionally hired help to make things easier. One of the housekeepers we had was a young woman I'll call Mia. She was kind and easygoing, and I spent a lot of time talking and joking with her. It felt like we were friends, even though there was a clear divide between our roles in the home. One afternoon after school, I came home to find that Mia wasn't in her usual spots, either the kitchen or on the first floor. I became curious and asked my grandma where she was. My grandma, who didn't speak much English, told me in our language that Mia was resting in her room in the basement. Then, almost as an afterthought, she mentioned something strange. Earlier in the day, Mia had come upstairs crying hysterically, asking for comfort. What really startled me was how my grandma described Mia. Her hair, which had always been thick and well kept, was now chopped short, horribly so. It was uneven, and some parts were cut so close to the scalp that it looked almost shaved. The cuts were jagged and random, like someone had taken scissors to it in a frenzy. There were strands of hair all over her clothes, and some had even transferred to my grandma during their embrace. No one else had been home at the time except my grandma and Mia. After Mia calmed down, she returned to her room in the basement. For the next few days, she carried on with her usual chores, but there was something different about her. She seemed distant, almost numb, like a shadow of the person she once was. My cousin even bought her a wig, which Mia wore every day from then on. But no one in the family dared to talk about what had happened, and I didn't have the courage to ask her directly. Eventually, life seemed to return to normal, and Mia began acting more like herself. One day, as we were chatting casually, she opened up to me about what had happened. She explained that she had been resting in her room, as usual, when everything around her suddenly felt off, a blur. The next thing she remembered was standing there, holding a pair of scissors, with her hair chopped off and scattered all around her. Realizing what she had done, she panicked and ran upstairs to my grandma, crying uncontrollably. Then Mia shared something about her life back in Indonesia. She had a boyfriend there, someone she deeply cared for and often dreamed about. In these dreams, he would tell her to return to Indonesia, but Mia's parents had disapproved of him, insisting she marry a wealthy man she had no feelings for. To escape the pressure and the expectations, she left Indonesia and took the job in Canada. What haunted her, however, was the idea that the boyfriend, or someone connected to him, might have hired someone to curse her. Mia believed the incident with her hair was a form of black magic, a punishment for defying her family's wishes and running away. At the time, I didn't know much about black magic or curses. I only had a vague idea that they involved some form of supernatural punishment or misfortune. But hearing Mia's story made it all feel much more real, as though there were unseen forces at play. A few weeks later, my mom told me that Mia was returning to Indonesia. When I asked why, she simply said that Mia's contract had ended. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that my mom might have known something more, that there was a quiet fear lurking behind her words, as if whatever had happened to Mia might not be over yet. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. It all began when I was about 5 years old. One night, I woke to a strange noise coming from the living room. Without thinking, I jumped out of bed, determined to figure out what it was. As I crept down the hallway, I saw the front door swing open by itself, only to slam shut right before my eyes. I didn't stop to question it. I ran outside after it. The night air was thick with the barking of dogs, but the strange thing was, we lived on a large piece of land in a quiet rural area, and there weren't any dogs around. What were they barking at that I couldn't see? Even now, I can't fully explain why I kept going after the door moved. Maybe it was curiosity or some strange instinct, but I felt that something had left the house, and I needed to know what. That moment, blurry and quick, has stayed with me for 30 years. As I got older, the strange events didn't stop. From about 8 to 16, I was haunted by terrifying dreams and unsettling experiences in the dark. Sometimes, I'd feel a heavy presence in my room, as if something dark was watching me. Other times, I'd see disturbing visions of what I thought was the devil. The fear consumed me, but I endured it somehow. At 24, I bought an old house in a quiet town, one that had been built on the grounds of a property where a house had been torn down years before. A close friend of mine warned me about the place before I moved in. He remembered running past the old house when we were kids, terrified of the upstairs windows where the curtains would move on their own, even though the house had been condemned and was completely empty. He also told me that the former owner had tragically taken his own life in an upstairs bedroom, the same room that was about to become mine. Despite the warnings, I went ahead and moved in. At first, everything seemed fine, but before long, strange things began to happen. My roommate would hear footsteps at night, always chasing them through the house, but never finding anyone. In my room, I'd hear water dripping, but no matter how hard I looked, I could never find the source. The floors and walls were dry, but the sound was unmistakable. It drove me mad. Then, the most unsettling thing started happening. Around 3 a.m., I'd wake up to my bed violently shaking. Sometimes it would happen twice in one night. It wasn't a seizure. I'd wake up fully aware and physically fine, but terrified. This continued for months, and the incidents only seemed to get worse. Desperate for some kind of relief, I began sleeping with a Bible under my pillow. The shaking didn't stop, but it did slow down. That's when I decided I had to do something. I started speaking aloud, rebuking whatever was in the house in the name of Jesus. I declared God's promises over the house, waking up everyone in the house with my loud prayers. I probably sounded crazy, but I didn't care. It worked. Over time, the disturbances faded, the bed shaking stopped completely, and I felt a peace I hadn't known before. I realized these entities no longer had power over me. I belonged to something greater, and I didn't have to live in fear anymore. But it didn't stop there. I began to realize these spirits weren't confined to that house. They seemed to follow me even when I traveled. Once, my bed shook again when I was away. That only made me more determined to face them. I knew I had the authority to stand my ground, and I would not back down. From as far back as I can remember, I've always had a strange connection to something beyond this world. One of my earliest memories, around the age of 5, was chasing something unseen out of our old farmhouse. I was lying in bed, trying to fall asleep, when a strange noise echoed from another room. Without a second thought, I jumped out of bed and rushed toward the sound, eager to catch whatever it was off guard. When I reached the living room, I saw the front door creak open by itself and slam shut just as I approached. Instead of hesitating, I bolted outside, convinced that whatever it was would be just beyond the door. The air was suddenly thick with the frantic barking of dogs. So many of them, it seemed, surrounding the house. This was strange, considering we lived out in the country, far away from neighbors. What were the dogs reacting to that I couldn't see? I think back on that moment, and I'm amazed by my fearlessness. I didn't question why the door moved on its own or why I felt this undeniable need to chase after something invisible. It all happened so quickly, and even though the memory is hazy now, it's still vivid all these years later. As I grew older, the bizarre occurrences kept happening. From the ages of 8 to 16, I was plagued by unsettling dreams and horrifying experiences at night. I'd lie in bed, frozen with a sense of dread, as a buzzing sound filled my ears and an invisible weight seemed to press down on me. I thought it was all linked to something sinister, something I could sense but never fully see. When I was 24, I bought a house on a property where an old, dilapidated farmhouse had once stood. Before moving in, A friend warned me about the place, telling me how, as a child, he would run past the house, too afraid to look at it. He mentioned that the previous owner had tragically taken their life in the upstairs bedroom, and the house was rumored to be haunted. He even said the upstairs curtains would move on their own, even though the house had been empty for years. Despite the warnings, I moved in anyway. At first, the disturbances were subtle. My roommate would hear footsteps when no one was around, and I'd often hear phantom dripping sounds near my bedroom. No matter how many times I searched, I couldn't find the source. But then things started to escalate. I began waking up at exactly 3 a.m., only to find my bed shaking violently. This wasn't a one-time occurrence. It happened regularly, sometimes twice in one night. It wasn't from a seizure or anything physical. I would wake up completely alert, terrified, but otherwise fine. Desperate for relief, I started sleeping with a Bible under my pillow, hoping it would offer some protection. It helped, but the disturbances didn't stop completely. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I started rebuking whatever spirits were haunting the house, saying prayers aloud and declaring God's promises. Sometimes, I would shout so loudly that I woke up the entire house. It may have seemed drastic, but it worked. Over time, the disturbances lessened, and eventually, they stopped altogether. Even after I left that house, the strange events didn't disappear completely. One time, I was away from home, and I noticed my bed shaking again, as though whatever was tormenting me had followed me. That realization made me even more determined to stand firm and fight back. With faith and perseverance, I eventually found peace. There were other odd occurrences, too. I once saw a strange aircraft, a huge, dark-winged silhouette flanked by 2 smaller military jets, flying low and fast over my house. Years later, I witnessed a formation of bluish-white, pulsating lights moving in a perfect double V pattern across the sky. They were unlike anything I had ever seen, silent, fast, and completely unexplainable. But perhaps the most unsettling experience happened when I was a teenager. One night, I woke up to find myself bathed in a column of intense blue light. The light was sharp and vivid, almost as if a beam was projecting through an opening above my bed. I couldn't move, and I screamed in terror until my father woke up and broke the trance with his voice. The light vanished as quickly as it came, but the memory stayed with me, a constant reminder that something far beyond our understanding had touched my life. I'd never experienced anything supernatural firsthand until that day. It wasn't the kind of dramatic, spine-chilling moment you'd expect from a horror movie, but the quiet unease of it stayed with me long after. Looking back, it felt more like being a character in a story you've heard over and over. A simple but unnerving brush with the unknown that no one could quite explain. It happened at my cousin's house, an old suburban home tucked away in the quiet outskirts of Silver Springs. We were there for a big family get-together, my parents, my aunt and uncle, and all my cousins. The house was alive with laughter, chatter, and the kind of joyful chaos only big family events can bring. By mid-afternoon, my cousins, both the adults and teens, decided to head up to the roof for some fresh air. The wind had picked up, and we were all excited to hang out, gossip, and joke around. The sky was clear, the kind of blue that only summer brings, and we spent hours laughing, even bursting into random sing-alongs. As the sun started to dip below the horizon, everyone decided to head back inside. Everyone except me and my younger cousin, Alex. We were on the far side of the roof, where there was a small wall separating the 2 sections, and the entrance was now directly in front of us. Since we weren't planning on staying much longer, we didn't feel the need to go back to the other side. Alex, at 15, had this infectious energy that always made him the life of the party, and at 22, I liked to think I could keep up with the younger crowd. That day, we were laughing uncontrollably, completely absorbed in our jokes and stories, and then it happened. Out of nowhere, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed from the far side of the roof, the same side we knew had been completely empty. The steps were slow but deliberate, the kind you can feel in your bones. They were getting closer. We froze instantly, our laughter cutting off as the reality of the situation hit us. The sound was unmistakable, steady, approaching us and growing louder with each passing second. We stood there, staring at each other in disbelief. Neither of us said a word, hoping the footsteps would stop and we could laugh it off as just some weird coincidence. But they didn't stop. They kept coming closer, until it was so clear that we couldn't ignore it any longer. When the footsteps were just a few yards away, echoing loud enough that there was no way it could have been in our heads, we both bolted. Without a single word, we ran down the stairs, practically tripping over each other to get back to the safety of the house. Even now, years later, Alex and I talk about that night. We both agree there's no way we both just imagined it. Neither of us mentioned the footsteps to the other beforehand. We both heard it at the same time, and our reaction was instinctual. We weren't in a spooky mindset at all. We were in a great mood, laughing and enjoying the moment, far from expecting anything eerie. The weirdness didn't end there, though. A few years later, I brought up the incident with Alex again, and she shared some things I didn't know at the time. She told me that my aunt and uncle had often heard strange noises on that very rooftop. Footsteps, soft giggling, even the sound of nails being hammered into wood, all in the dead of night. My cousin had even heard the sound of anklets jingling, like something you'd hear from a woman in a distant place, but that wasn't something you'd expect to hear in a house in Silver Springs. Though my aunt and uncle never openly acknowledged hearing those sounds, Alex was certain they'd had their own experiences, but chose not to talk about it, likely to avoid scaring her even more. This story involves my family, my kids, sister, and mother, and it takes place in my mother's home, located in a small town near Asheville, North Carolina. I grew up in that house from the age of 9. While my time there wasn't filled with supernatural events, there was one peculiar thing I experienced repeatedly. Whenever I went down to the basement, where my bedroom was, I would sometimes feel a distinct touch on my back as I rounded the landing on the stairs. It wasn't painful, more like a sharp flick of a finger. Initially, I thought one of my brothers was behind me, but every time I turned around, there was no one there. Over time, I shrugged it off as something odd but harmless, maybe even just a trick of my mind. Other than that, I don't recall anything unusual happening in the house while I lived there. After my father passed away in the early 1990s, my mother stayed in the family home alone. My wife and I lived nearby, so we visited her often with our 3 children. Her house was a 2-story colonial, and from the living room, you could see straight down the hallway to the bedrooms and bathroom. One day, after visiting her, my oldest daughter, who was 12 at the time, said something in the car that caught me off guard. "Do you ever see the shadow in Grandma's hallway?" she asked. I told her I hadn't, so she explained that she often saw the shadow of a person quickly moving across the hallway, from the area of the basement stairs to one of the bedrooms. When I asked if this was the first time she'd seen it, she said it had been happening for years. "You didn't tell Grandma, did you?" I asked. She assured me she hadn't, and I told her not to. The last thing I wanted was for my mother to feel scared in her own home. I tried to downplay it, suggesting it could be a trick of the light or a reflection from passing cars. But over the years, my daughter became certain it wasn't light or reflections. Day or night, curtains open or closed, lights on or off, she said the shadow would still appear. She described it as the shape of a man, moving quickly. By then, I started to believe her, even though I hadn't heard of shadow figures at the time. Still, I told her to keep it to herself. My mother, being deeply religious, didn't like to discuss anything that could be considered supernatural. It clashed with her Christian beliefs. This was another reason we couldn't tell her about the shadow. As time passed, my other 2 children also began seeing the shadow figure. They described it exactly the same way. It was unnerving, but we didn't share this with my mother. In 2006, during a visit to my mother's house, she made a casual but startling remark. She mentioned how living alone could sometimes feel lonely, and I agreed. Then she added, almost as an afterthought, that it could also get a little scary. I didn't press her for details, not wanting to upset her, but she continued on her own. She said that at night, she would hear noises coming from the basement. Sounds like someone working at a workbench, even using a vise. but she quickly brushed it off, calling them house noises. When I pointed out that those weren't typical house noises, she firmly insisted they were. I let it go. Then, almost casually, she said, "And sometimes there's the shadow of a man that flits across the hallway, but I know that's just my imagination." My kids and I exchanged wide-eyed looks, but we kept our reactions in check. I believe this was her way of acknowledging the strange occurrences while keeping them within the boundaries of what felt acceptable to her faith. A few months later, my mother fell ill and was hospitalized. During that time, my sister went to her house to handle some chores. While gathering laundry in the basement, she heard a loud, startling bang. Frightened, she rushed out of the house and called me from her own home next door, asking me to check it out. I agreed, but only if she came with me. When we went to the basement, I searched for anything that could have caused the noise, a fallen object, a burst pipe, but found nothing. To test her reaction, I warned her and then forcefully closed a door. The loud slam made her jump, and she exclaimed, "That's it. That's the sound." But there was no way the door could have slammed on its own. A few days later, my sister began hearing similar loud bangs in her own basement. But that's a story for her to tell. Sadly, my mother never returned to her home. She passed away in the hospital from cancer shortly after. The house was sold, and though my sister keeps in touch with the current owner, they've never mentioned anything unusual. My parents, along with several aunts and uncles, immigrated from the Midwest to a small town in southern Michigan, eventually settling in a quiet rural area. I was born in Michigan, as were most of my cousins. Our families were tight-knit, often visiting each other throughout the year. Summers were especially fun because my siblings and I would spend a week at different cousins' homes, and they'd return the favor at ours. It was a tradition we cherished, one that always brought a sense of adventure. One summer, my older brother and I stayed at my cousin Matt's house. He lived on a sprawling property just outside of a small town near the edge of the woods, not far from an old, decaying farmhouse. The land stretched for about 10 acres, with tall, thick trees surrounding the house. We were about 12 and 13 years old, and it felt like the best summer we could have imagined. We spent our days outside, playing games and exploring the woods. One particular game, however, took a strange turn. We decided to pretend that Matt's younger brother Adam, who was around 9 years old, was invisible. At first, Adam found it hilarious. He tried talking to us, and we'd act as if we couldn't hear him, looking around in confusion. When he touched us, we'd freeze and ask, "Did you feel that? What was it?" It was all in good fun, until it went too far. As time passed, Adam began to get frustrated. It was clear he didn't like being left out of everything, and soon the joke started to lose its charm. We decided we needed to end it quickly, so we came up with a plan to bring Adam back into the world with a chant. We made up an incantation on the spot, convinced that repeating the words together would somehow reverse the game. The three of us clambered up into Matt's treehouse to make the ritual official, laughing nervously as we prepared for the moment. The treehouse was a rustic structure, more of a sturdy platform than a typical wooden hideaway. Matt's dad, a carpenter with a fondness for building things with his hands, had built it himself. The treehouse was perched about 8 feet above the ground, supported by thick wooden beams that stretched high up into the old oak tree. It felt like the tree itself was part of the structure, solid and unshakable. Once we were settled on the platform, we prepared to perform the chant. We stood together and, with a mixture of excitement and tension, spoke in unison. "Spirits of the forest, hear my plea, bring Adam back to me." It was just a bit of fun, or so we thought. As soon as the last word left our mouths, something strange happened. Without warning, the entire treehouse shook violently. It wasn't as if it tipped or collapsed, but rather, the entire structure seemed to jerk sideways and plummet straight down to the ground, landing with a thunderous thud. The oddest part was that it didn't break apart. The platform landed perfectly intact, and not a single branch on the tree seemed to snap or bend. We were all thrown to the ground, but luckily, no one was seriously hurt. Just a few bruises here and there. And as if on cue, Adam was back, no longer invisible. He was standing there, wide-eyed, looking just as confused as we felt. We stood there, speechless, trying to make sense of what had just happened. None of us could explain how or why the treehouse had fallen. We told Matt's dad about the incident, but we left out the details of the chant. At the time, the spirits part didn't seem to matter, and we couldn't connect it to the bizarre event. Matt's dad just seemed surprised but didn't press the issue, and we moved on quickly, as if it were just another strange but harmless occurrence. Years later, my brother, cousins, and I still talk about that summer. We all remember that day exactly the same, and none of us can come up with a plausible explanation for the treehouse falling like it did. While we entertain the idea of a more reasonable explanation, deep down, we all agree that invoking the spirits of the forest was probably a very bad idea, especially when done in jest. It was 1990, and I was 13 years old, living in a small town just outside of Portland, Oregon. One chilly fall afternoon, my mother and I drove to the airport to pick up an elderly woman named Farida. She had flown in all the way from Indonesia, and she was a family friend, specifically a close friend of my mom's old colleague. The moment I laid eyes on Farida, I knew something was different about her. She was dressed in a long, flowing purple robe that enveloped her like a blanket, her frailty making her seem even more delicate after such a long journey. I thought it strange, too, that someone so elderly and fragile would make such a long, arduous trip across the globe just to visit a friend's son. But Farida wasn't just an elderly woman. She was a psychic. As my mother explained later, Farida had a fascinating history. She was friends with Dr. Alan J. Hynek, the renowned UFO investigator from the Project Blue Book days. Farida had even claimed to have been visited by extraterrestrials, strange, unexplainable beings who left odd, round scars on her feet, marks that could only be explained as something supernatural. A few days after her arrival, Farida joined us for dinner, and I'll never forget how she astounded everyone with her predictions. She told us we would eventually move west, all the way to the coast. At the time, it seemed absurd, but sure enough, a few years later, my family did pack up and move to Seattle. But it wasn't until one cold winter night that things really took a bizarre turn. Farida wasn't feeling well, so my parents had her lie down on the couch in our living room. That's when everything shifted from strange to downright unsettling. I was a typical, energetic 13-year-old, always running around and never still, but on that night, something was different. I found myself frozen in place, wide-eyed, just watching. Farida went to the bathroom, and that's when I heard a blood-curdling shriek. She bolted out of the bathroom, her face pale and frantic. She claimed to have seen something in the mirror, something terrible. After a few minutes, she calmed herself down and returned to the couch. But just hours later, she passed away. I'll never forget the frantic chaos of the paramedics trying to revive her, and the way her bandages were discarded hastily. My father made the call to Dr. Hynek himself, informing him of the sad news. Farida was buried in a cemetery on the outskirts of town, just past the edge of the city. But that's where things took a strange twist, a twist that wouldn't fully reveal itself until years later. When I was 17, I returned to Portland after spending some time in Seattle. I was staying with my sister, and one night, something happened that I couldn't explain. I woke up in the middle of the night, but when I looked down, I saw myself, lying in bed. I was floating above my own body, gazing down at myself and my nephew, who was sleeping beside me. I couldn't move, couldn't feel my body, and when I tried to scream, nothing came out. Then I saw her, Farida. She was standing right in front of me, looking calm, but her presence was electric, like a jolt of energy. And just as suddenly, I was back in my own body, completely disoriented and unsure of what had just happened. I still don't have an explanation for it, but the terror and awe of that moment has stayed with me. That wasn't the last time. The years that followed were filled with more strange encounters I couldn't explain. When I was in my mid-20s, I was living in a house near the Columbia River in Washington with my best friend, Michael, a guitarist. One afternoon, after a relaxing picnic, we were in the kitchen doing dishes when something caught my eye. A huge white moth had landed on Michael's girlfriend, Kathy, just below her shoulder. I didn't say anything at first, but my skin crawled at the sight of that moth. It wasn't just any moth. Where I come from, moths like that, pure white ones, are believed to symbolize death. I didn't want to freak out Kathy, who was heavily into Wicca, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The next day, Michael was hanging out with a few people I didn't trust. I gave him a look, silently warning him to be careful. That night, I got a call from Kathy. She was crying, her voice barely audible. Michael had been found dead in his hotel room. It hit me like a ton of bricks. I couldn't help but feel that the moth had somehow been a warning, but I kept it to myself. That night, my girlfriend and I stayed with Kathy, trying to comfort her as best we could. We spent the night talking, drinking wine, and listening to Michael's favorite song, One by U2. I never told Kathy about the moth. I couldn't. Since then, strange things have continued to happen. I've seen smoke swirl into strange, ghostly shapes, and I once witnessed a UFO silently flying over the Cascade Mountains. The sight so surreal that I felt as if time itself had stopped. But the eeriest experience of all happens when I stand at the edge of the Pacific Ocean, watching the moon rise over the dark water. In those moments, I feel the presence of many spirits calling out from beyond, as if they're just beyond my reach, yet somehow right beside me. And even now, I find myself wondering, what's out there? What's watching us? And where will it lead next? Hey everyone! I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. Hi, my name is Emily, and I'm 14. I don't consider myself special, but I guess I live in a house that's anything but ordinary. I've lived in the same house in Pine Lake, a quiet little town, for as long as I can remember, and for just as long, strange things have happened here. Some of it's small stuff, some of it's bigger, but they all make me wonder if this house is different in some way. I remember one time, I was standing in my room, looking out the window. The blinds were all out of place, like someone had moved them. I don't even mess with them. I hardly even go near that window. It was strange, but I fixed them and didn't think much of it. The next morning, I noticed they were messed up again, like someone had touched them during the night. It's a small thing, but it felt off, like I wasn't really alone in my room. Then there are the sounds. I hear creaks in the middle of the night when everyone's asleep, and sometimes the doors will open, just a little, never all the way, when nobody's around. My mom's had even stranger experiences than me. She's heard someone whisper her name when she's been in the kitchen, all alone. There have been times when she's felt a tap on her shoulder and turned around to find no one there. And my cat, Whiskers, he's seen some of these things too. But I haven't seen anything myself, not yet. You might think these are just typical spooky house stories, things you've heard 1,000 times. And maybe you're right, but there's one experience that stands out more than the others. I was 12 when it happened. It was just a regular evening, like any other. No weird things happened at school, and I was heading up to my room to get ready for bed when something strange started happening. As I walked up the stairs, I suddenly started laughing, but not the way I normally laugh. It wasn't funny. There was no joke, no reason for it. I was just laughing, and I couldn't stop. I glanced over at my mom, who was in her room. She was standing by her bed, staring at me like I was losing my mind. I remember her asking, "Are you okay?" But I couldn't even answer because I was still laughing. The weirdest part, Whiskers, my cat, was sitting there watching me, staring like he was seeing something else. He looked at me like I wasn't even me anymore. I knew, deep down, that it wasn't really me laughing. I tried everything to stop, but no matter what I did, the laughter wouldn't stop. I shuffled into the bathroom, still giggling like I was losing control, and started brushing my teeth. I even said something like, "Why am I laughing? Brushing your teeth isn't funny." And then, just like that, the laughter stopped. It was like someone, or something, had let go of me. I was left standing there, feeling like a freaked out 12-year-old again. Later, my mom told me that she felt someone sit down on her bed right after it happened, but she didn't see anyone. We talked about it, trying to figure it out. My mom said the laugh had sounded strange, like it wasn't my normal laugh at all. She also mentioned how Whiskers had acted. Cats can see things we can't, right? So maybe Whiskers saw something we didn't. To be honest, I've never really felt scared, just unsettled. It's almost like the house has its own mood, and I'm just another part of it. I can't explain it, but I feel like I'm being watched sometimes. Maybe it's just the house, or maybe it's something more. Who knows? Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. This happened in late January of 1994, while my parents were away celebrating their anniversary. I had just gotten off work and pulled into the driveway around 5:30 p.m. As I stepped out of the car, I noticed a radio blaring loudly in the distance. Since it was a chilly winter evening, I assumed the neighbors were having a get-together and playing music by the fire. I didn't think much of it and headed inside. The evening went on like any other. I ate dinner, watched some TV, and read a book for a while. My dog, Max, a scrappy little terrier, kept me company. Max was protective, always alert to anything out of the ordinary. I never really worried about being alone with him around. The radio outside kept playing, but I paid it no mind as the night wore on, eventually heading to bed. Around 11:45 p.m., I was jolted awake by a loud crashing sound coming from the other end of the house. At first, I thought Max might have knocked something over in the living room, but then I realized that didn't make sense. There was nothing in the room that could make that kind of noise. Uneasy, I called for Max, and he immediately jumped onto the bed, curling up next to me. That's when I heard it. When you've lived in a house for years, you get to know its every creak and groan. Sitting on the bed, listening for any other noises that might explain the crash, I heard a door handle turn. It came from the back room, the one that used to be my mom's sewing room. Without thinking, I called out, "Who's there?" The handle snapped back into place, and I froze, feeling a cold chill run down my spine. Max just stared at me, his usual bark replaced with eerie silence. I was rattled. After a moment, I decided to call my friend Jenna, who lived just a few streets away, and ask if she could come over. Carefully, I got out of bed and crept down the hallway toward my parents' room. As I passed the window, I realized the radio was still blaring from the backyard. It was strange, but I pushed it aside, too focused on the unsettling events to think much about it. I called Jenna's house, but no one picked up, so I called her sister, Kate. She didn't answer either, but I started telling her about the noises and what had been going on. The more I explained, the more nervous I became. While we were talking, I suddenly heard footsteps outside the window. My parents' house sat on a quiet street, and the driveway ran along the full length of the house, with my dad's old truck parked right by the bedroom window. I strained my ears, but all I could hear was the radio. That's when it clicked. The radio wasn't coming from the neighbor's yard. It was coming from my parents' truck. Panic set in, and I told Kate what I just realized. She urged me to call the police, and at that point, I knew I couldn't stay in the house alone any longer. I dialed 911 and tried to explain what was happening, though I could barely make sense of it myself. The dispatcher kept me on the line, asking calm questions. When she asked if my dog was with me, I mentioned that Max had been strangely quiet. As soon as the police arrived, Max started barking uncontrollably. He didn't stop until I opened the door for the officer. I explained everything: the door handle, the crashing sound, the footsteps, and the strange radio. One officer went out to the backyard to search the grounds, while the other headed straight to the sewing room. He opened the door, and everything appeared normal. No signs of anyone being there. The window was locked, and a metal bar secured it from the inside. No way anyone could have gotten in. The other officer returned and confirmed the radio was indeed coming from the truck. We walked to the car together, but the doors were locked. The truck was old, and the only way to unlock it was with the keys inside the house. So how did the radio turn on? My friends kept calling to check on me, and the officer suggested I spend the night somewhere else. I grabbed a bag, left quickly, and stayed at Jenna's place. The next morning, I returned to the house. Everything seemed normal in the daylight, but the unease lingered. In the days that followed, I remembered other odd things that had happened over the years, but hadn't connected them until then. There was the time I'd been hanging laundry in the backyard, and my brother had just gone inside. A minute later, I followed him, only to have the laundry door suddenly pulled out of my hand. I thought he was playing a prank, but when I looked behind the door, no one was there. Another time, Max had been in my parents' bedroom, growling and barking at the back wall. When I called him out, he was upset, still staring at the wall, but there was nothing there. So I'm not sure. Maybe the house is haunted. All I know is that every time something strange happens, my parents are away, and I'm certain I didn't imagine it. My grandma Evelyn was the kind of grandmother you'd expect from a warm, rural home. She always had a jar of homemade cookies on the counter, sewed quilts by hand, and always made sure there was ice cream waiting for us. She was the heart of our family, warm and loving. She passed away in 1993 after a tragic car accident. The loss hit me hard. I cried every night for weeks. One evening, while looking for something to comfort me in the kitchen, I found a jar of strawberry jam she'd made that summer. It was the last jar she had made. When I opened it, I found the seal had popped, and it was spoiled. I had to throw it out. That small act of loss broke me all over again. I went to bed that night, feeling empty, and cried myself to sleep. Around midnight, I felt a tug on my foot. Half asleep, I thought it was one of my little sisters. They were only 9 and 6 at the time, and I was 18. The tugging didn't stop, so I kicked out, annoyed. I'm not exactly a happy camper when I'm woken up, but the tugging stopped, only for something else to start, tickling my side. That did it. I was beyond irritated. I rolled over, ready to scold one of my sisters, and froze. It wasn't one of my sisters. It was my grandma. She stood there, a calm, loving smile on her face, looking at me. After a few moments, she slowly backed away, her figure light as air, and floated up toward the ceiling, disappearing without a sound. I lay there in a daze, but somehow I felt a strange comfort. I wasn't as sad after that night. Months passed, and Christmas arrived. My dad was playing Santa, handing out gifts to the family. As I opened mine, I noticed the tag, "To Teresa, from Grandma Evelyn." I couldn't believe it. She had passed away 6 months earlier. What shocked me even more was that she and Grandpa had so many grandchildren, over 50, that they never gave presents, just cards or checks. But there it was, a beautiful, handmade rug. Grandma had made it for me, wrapped it, and given it to my other grandmother to hold on to, just in case she forgot. She even written the label in July. I sat there, holding the rug, feeling both overwhelmed and comforted. Years later, after I married and had kids, I saw her again. We were living in an apartment at the time, and things there were strange. Ghostly figures, whispers in the walls. But that's another story. One night, I woke up to the sound of pots and pans rattling in the kitchen. I immediately thought someone had broken in. No one lived in the apartment above us, and below us was just a laundry room. My husband was beside me, so it wasn't him. My heart raced as I sat up, bracing myself to check it out. That's when I saw her. She was standing in the doorway of our bedroom, her figure casting a shadow over it. Her hair was darker, more vivid, and she looked younger, much younger than I had ever seen her. I froze, unable to speak. I'm convinced something else was in that kitchen, something dark, something dangerous. But there she was, protecting us. My husband thought I was imagining things, but I know what I saw. Not long after, we moved from that apartment and into a house in a quiet neighborhood. During our first week, while I was putting my baby daughter to bed, I heard it. Her voice. It was unmistakable. She said, "Good night." I know this may not seem like the most extraordinary story, but to me, it means everything. I can still feel her presence at times. There have been moments in my life where I should have been hurt, or worse, but somehow I walked away without a scratch. Like the time I crashed my car, plowed through a wooden fence, and hit a house, yet walked away unharmed. Or the time my brakes failed on a busy street, and my car stopped just inches from a telephone pole. Was it luck? I don't think so. I believe it was her. My grandma Evelyn is still watching over me, protecting me and reminding me that love never truly ends. It lingers, carrying on forever. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. In the summer of 1998, when I was 12 years old, my family relocated to a small town outside of Austin, Texas. Our new home was a large, creaky farmhouse on the edge of town, surrounded by dense woods. It felt like a full house. My parents, my younger brother, 2 older sisters, 2 nephews, 2 nieces, my brother-in-law, my uncle, and me. We'd only been in the house for a couple of weeks when the strange occurrences began. It started with a quiet noise we could all hear at exactly 3:30 a.m. every night, a faint, rhythmic knock, spaced every 2 to 3 seconds. The sound would travel along the old wooden walls, starting from my bedroom and making its way to the front door. It was unsettling, but we all tried to ignore it. But by the 3rd week, things took a darker turn. One night, my older sister, my 2 nephews, and I decided to sleep in the front room, which had a large window overlooking the driveway. For some reason, we didn't think much about the fact that the knocking always ended right at the front door, where we were planning to sleep that night. We stayed up talking, laughing about school, until suddenly, like clockwork, the knocking began. The sound started at the back of the house, near my bedroom, and slowly worked its way along the walls toward the front door, just like before. But this time, when it reached the door, it didn't stop. Instead, it became louder, turning into powerful bangs that shook the entire doorframe. It sounded like someone was slamming their fists against it, one after the other. The banging lasted for what felt like an eternity, though it was probably just about 10 minutes. We were terrified. After a few minutes of the heavy banging, the adults rushed into the front room, armed with whatever they could grab, kitchen knives, a broom, anything. They looked just as scared as we were. As they approached the door, something even stranger happened. The door to my niece's bedroom, where they were sleeping, suddenly slammed shut with such force that the hinges tore off. It was as though something had thrown the door shut with unimaginable power. My uncle and I ran to check on them, but when we tried to open the door, it wouldn't budge, even though the hinges had come completely off. Without thinking, my uncle threw his shoulder into the door, ramming it open like a scene from a movie. When the door finally gave way, he stumbled into the room, landing on the floor. What he saw made his blood freeze. My nieces were huddled in the corner, clinging to each other and shaking uncontrollably. But what caught his eye was the solid black figure standing motionless on their bed. It had no clear features, just a deep, dark shadow, but it was undeniably there. The figure moved across the bed slowly, like it was searching for something. Then, with no hesitation, it stepped right through the window, as if the glass wasn't even there, and onto the grass outside. My uncle stood frozen in place, staring in shock as the figure turned to face him. For a brief moment, it seemed to lock eyes with him, if it even had eyes. Then, just as quickly as it appeared, it vanished. He shouted for the rest of us to come and see, but by the time we got to the room, the figure was gone, and as if on cue, the banging on the front door stopped, the silence deafening in comparison. The adults decided it was best to gather all of us kids into one room for the rest of the night. None of us slept that evening. The fear and tension hung in the air, thick and suffocating. By morning, we had all had enough. We packed a few things, found a nearby motel, and stayed there while we figured out what to do. It didn't take long for my family to decide that we were leaving the farmhouse for good. We didn't stay to see what else might happen. Even now, whenever I close my eyes, I can still hear the faint knocking, growing louder and louder in my mind. To this day, we never figured out what it was, but there's one thing I'll always remember. We never went back. When my family, myself, my mom, my dad, my 2 little sisters, and my little brother, moved to a house in the quiet town of Pine Lake, New Hampshire, we never expected it to be anything more than an ordinary home. But it didn't take long for my mom to start experiencing strange things. Every night around 2:30 a.m., she would wake up to the sound of footsteps echoing down the hallway toward my room and the stairs. The steps would climb the stairs, slowly approaching the top, right outside my bedroom, and then stop. It was strange because the hallway and my brother's room were carpeted, but the steps sounded like they were walking on wood, not carpet. After a brief pause, the footsteps would turn around and head back down the stairs. Realizing it wasn't me, she would wake up my dad. Dad, in just his boxers, would grab his rifle and search every inch of the house, but nothing ever seemed out of place. All the doors and windows were locked. Annoyed, he'd dismiss it as nothing more than one of my mom's dreams and go back to bed. Meanwhile, my sisters and I called the footsteps my mom's little friend. I used to ask her, "Did your little friend visit last night?" She'd get upset, questioning whether she was going crazy. Eventually, the footsteps stopped, probably around my 12th birthday in October. It wasn't until late November 1989 that I had my first experience. I was asleep in my room when I woke to a strange feeling, that I wasn't alone. I always made sure my closet door was closed because the thought of it being open freaked me out. But that night it was wide open, and the room felt unnaturally cold. I could even see my breath in the air. Then the window across from my bed suddenly slammed open, and a crack appeared in the glass. Terrified, I didn't scream. I just stared at the closet. That's when I saw it. A small greenish ball, almost like cotton candy or smoke, floating in the air. It grew larger and began to shape into a figure, a woman. She wore a dress from the early 1900s, decorated with a faint floral print, and she had a soft green glow surrounding her. She was smiling at me. I couldn't scream. The only sound that came out of me was a faint whisper. The woman walked up to my bedside and smiled down at me, not with an evil grin, but with a calm, almost comforting expression. She gently touched my forehead and caressed the side of my face, but I was too terrified to think of it as a kind gesture. What really shook me was when she began walking away. She would turn toward the door and walk away, only to do the same thing again and again. Finally, she disappeared. I don't know if I fainted or simply fell asleep after that, but when I woke, the window was still open, and the crack in the glass remained. I knew what I saw wasn't a dream, but I kept it to myself, too scared to tell my mom or dad. Over time, the strange occurrences only increased. I was pushed down the stairs while I was alone, almost strangled in my parents' bed, and objects were thrown at me by an unseen force. But the worst event happened when I was about 14. One night, my dad had gone out, leaving just my mom, my siblings, and me at home. My mom was on the phone with my grandmother, and my brother was with her. My sisters were in their room, and I was brushing my hair after taking a bath. I was in my brother's room when I heard my mom hang up the phone, followed by the sound of the front door slamming open and shut. Footsteps stomped around downstairs. At first, I thought it was my dad coming home early in a bad mood, but as I listened more closely, I realized it wasn't him. I ran to my mom and told her there was a man downstairs. She was about to call 911 when we heard it, footsteps coming up the stairs, calling my name in my grandma's voice. "Stace," it called. I nearly ran toward the voice, thinking it was my grandma, but then I remembered she had just hung up with my mom. My mom stepped in front of me, shaking, and called out, "Go away. You can't have her. I won't let you take her." But it didn't stop. The voice kept calling my name. "Stace, Stace." It sounded like it was right on the landing. Gathering us all around her, my mom led us down the hall as we prayed the rosary in unison. When we reached the stairs, we heard a loud "Stace." It felt as though it was right in front of us. We all ran down the stairs, tears streaming down our faces, and then an ice-cold wind blew through us. We kept running out the door, across the street to our neighbor's house. We stayed there until my uncle arrived to pick us up. When he came, we piled into his car, desperate to leave. As we drove slowly past the house, I saw a tall, shadowy figure standing in my parents' bedroom window. Its eyes glowed bright red, like burning coals. It wore a jagged black crown, and one of its hands looked like a claw. As we drove by, the figure quickly appeared in another window, still watching me. My mom saw it too, but my uncle denied seeing anything. After that night, I went to live with my grandparents, and although I did return to the house eventually, it was against my will. My parents had to drag me back, kicking and screaming. There were other unsettling events that took place in that house, but I won't bore you with the details. Thankfully, we moved out a couple of years later. Now, I'm happily married and living in New Hampshire with my 10-month-old son. I still have spiritual experiences every so often, but nothing like what I went through in that house in Pine Lake. I swear on my marriage and my child that everything I've shared here is the truth. Hey everyone, I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. It was late, the clock on the microwave reading 10:26 p.m. when I finally hung up the phone with my best friend Lori. We've been chatting for over an hour, talking about everything and nothing. If my mom knew how late it was, she'd be livid. I quickly glanced at the refrigerator. My mom had left some macaroni and cheese, but I was craving something different. A big bowl of spaghetti sat there, just waiting to be eaten. I grabbed a fork and sat down at the table, twirling the noodles, the familiar smell of marinara sauce filling the kitchen. Then I heard it. A faint cry. My fork froze mid-air. I strained my ears, listening closely. The sound grew louder, almost like a low, hollow moan, and then I heard it again, louder this time. Hello, Mummy. I froze. My heart raced. Was someone in the garage? Maybe a burglar. But then the voice grew clearer, more desperate. Hello, Mummy. Terror shot through me. I dropped my fork and ran to the phone, dialing 911. My voice shook as I tried to explain the cries. The dispatcher reassured me they were sending help and hung up. I bolted for the closet in my parents' bedroom, slamming the door shut behind me. The moaning didn't stop. It echoed in my mind, every desperate plea creeping under my skin. But something wasn't right. If it was a burglar, why would they be asking for help? Why not stay quiet or run away? Then, just as I was trying to gather my thoughts, the cries grew louder, closer. I could feel my body go cold. Something was in the house. Something, not human. And then, I saw it. A pale, wispy figure, hovering inches above the ground. My breath caught in my throat. It drifted toward my parents' room, moving with an eerie, unnatural grace. Its form was translucent, as if it wasn't quite there. Hello, Mummy. The voice moaned, not to me, but to the wall that separated me from the thing I had just seen. Then, as quickly as it appeared, it was gone. I sat there, huddled in the closet, trembling. I had no idea how long it had been when I heard pounding footsteps throughout the house, each thud echoing in my chest. Then, just as suddenly as it started, there was silence. A voice called out, "Anyone home?" "Miss, this is the police." Relief flooded through me. "Here," I called out, barely able to speak. The officers entered the room. One of them asked, "Are you all right, miss?" I nodded, feeling lightheaded. "I just need to call my mom." But when I reached for the phone, I couldn't remember her work number. I stared at the receiver, panic setting in. After some time, the officers managed to contact her. She came home quickly, and I told her everything. But she didn't believe me. No one did. They'd all said it was my imagination, that I was just scared. For weeks I couldn't escape the sound of that ghostly cry. I woke up every night, drenched in sweat, the voice echoing in my ears. After months of sleepless nights, my parents decided to move. They couldn't stand seeing me like this, and honestly, neither could I. We found a new house. It was close enough for my parents to keep their jobs, and I didn't have to switch schools. Best of all, the nightmares stopped. The ghost didn't follow us. It wasn't my problem anymore. But even now, I still feel guilty for the couple who bought our old house, the one where I heard the haunting cries, the house where my nightmares lived. I'd like to share something strange and unsettling that happened to me a few years ago. I'll tell you the facts as they unfolded and leave it up to you to decide if this qualifies as a ghost story. It was December 1996 when my girlfriend and I moved into a rather ordinary house on the outskirts of Pine Lake, a small town just outside Cleveland. The house, about 70 years old, was a colonial-style home that had seen better days. The aluminum siding and lack of curb appeal didn't do much to attract attention, and the cramped neighborhood only added to its sense of isolation. Still, it was a deal, especially with the price we managed to negotiate. The house needed a lot of work. It had been left in disrepair, especially during the last years of its previous owner's life. A woman named Doris had lived there until she passed away the previous year. She was known in the town as a heavy drinker, and she had lived with a small pack of dogs, ranging from tiny terriers to larger mutts. When she passed away at 46, no one had found her for several days. The dogs were trapped inside with her, leaving their mark on the house and, tragically, on Doris herself. We moved in and immediately got to work, tearing down the walls of the first floor. We installed a new kitchen, replaced the floors, and put in new windows. One odd thing I noticed early on was that every door in the house had latches on both sides. Bedroom doors, closet doors, even the door to the attic. Every door had a lock that could be fastened from either side. It struck me as strange but didn't linger in my mind for long. One day, while tearing down the crumbling plaster in the dining room, I came across a small bundle wrapped in plastic and secured with rubber bands. The bundle was covered in a fine black dust, and there was a distinct outline where it had rested, hidden behind the lathe and plaster for years. Curious, I pulled it out and unwrapped it. Inside were old, faded photographs dated 1962. They showed a young girl, no older than 12, posing uncomfortably in lingerie. The images filled me with a deep sense of revulsion and sadness. My girlfriend and I agreed it was disturbing. Messed up didn't begin to describe it, and we threw them away without hesitation. For a while, nothing out of the ordinary happened. We stayed busy with work, school, and renovations. But then, one Saturday in February, I experienced something I still can't explain. We were working on the upstairs bathroom, me tearing out the wall behind the tub, while my girlfriend worked on the plumbing. We talked as we worked, as we usually did. I was lying on the floor, wedged between the tub and the wall, using a crowbar to remove nails. Then, out of nowhere, an image flashed in my mind. It was vivid and horrifying. My girlfriend, her long red hair matted with blood as I struck her from behind with the crowbar. The vision was so real, so intense, that I had to physically shake it off. I was stunned. Why would such a thought enter my mind? I tried to push it away and went back to work, but the image returned, even more vivid and terrifying. I couldn't stay in the house that day, so I left and spent the rest of the afternoon away. After that day, the image haunted me whenever I was in the house, especially when holding something heavy. I started avoiding the house whenever I could, spending long hours away at work. When I was home, I stuck to the backyard, clearing trees and working on the landscaping. The renovations slowed to a crawl. Then, in April, something unexpected happened. Our young neighbor, Emma, approached us one evening as we returned home. Emma had lived in Pine Lake her whole life and remembered Doris, the house's previous owner, from when she was a child. We invited her over for coffee, but when she glanced at the house, her demeanor suddenly changed. She hesitated and then, almost in a whisper, said, I never Ever thought I'd be inside that house? Confused, my girlfriend and I asked her what she meant. At first, we thought she was referring to Doris's death. But Emma shook her head and said, "You don't know the history of this house, do you?" She went on to tell us that Doris's mother had been bludgeoned to death in the house on Christmas Eve, 15 years ago. A year before that, Doris's father had died under suspicious circumstances, officially ruled a suicide. Doris had lived in the house her entire life. The girl in the photos, it was Doris herself, and it was Doris who had killed her own mother. At this point, I stopped Emma from saying more. I already knew where the murders had happened. I told her it was in the bathroom, where Doris's mother had been in the tub. Emma confirmed this, adding that Doris's father had died in the same way in the same place. I haven't been back to that house since. Today, I'm happily married to someone new, and we're expecting our first child this December. My ex-girlfriend still lives in that house. I can only hope she finds peace there. When I was about 8 or 9 years old, I had an unsettling experience during a visit to my aunt's house. I'd been there countless times before, probably since I was around 4. At first, nothing ever felt out of the ordinary, though the house always had this strange old vibe to it, especially when I was there alone. It never crossed my mind that there could be something more to it than just its age. My aunt's house sat on top of a hill, well away from the other homes in the area. It was surrounded by thick trees, giving it a feeling of isolation, like the house existed in its own little world. On one particular day, my aunt was hosting a party. As usual, the men were outside, laughing and enjoying the music a bit too loudly. Some of the women were inside, gathered around the kitchen. I, on the other hand, was wandering around, looking for something to do to pass the time. At one point, I felt a pressure in my lower belly and decided it was time to find the bathroom. I entered the house through the front door. The bathroom was directly to the left, just a few steps in, with the kitchen on the right. I walked in, shut the door behind me, and began to unbuckle my overalls. Then I felt something that made my skin crawl. The unmistakable sensation of being watched. It wasn't just a vague feeling of someone being in the house. It was the unmistakable sense of someone right there, staring at me. I glanced up, and that's when I saw it. Right in front of me, just beyond the edge of the shower curtain, a hand appeared. At first, I thought it was my imagination, but then it started to move, slowly, almost uncertainly, as it began to pull the curtain back. It wasn't a fast motion. It was hesitant, like it wasn't sure of what it was doing. I knew right away this wasn't just some random hand. It was cold, unnatural, and it didn't belong there. Fear paralyzed me. I couldn't scream, couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My body froze, and all I could do was watch in horror as the hand continued to pull the curtain back, revealing nothing but emptiness behind it. It wasn't like the hand was searching for something. It was almost as if it was just waiting. Finally, after what seemed like forever, I somehow found the strength to move. I bolted out of the bathroom, my heart racing. I didn't want to tell anyone what had just happened, especially my mom, who was in the kitchen with my aunt. I didn't want to sound crazy, or like I was just trying to get attention. So when I walked back into the kitchen, I nervously said, "Mom, there are a lot of flies in the bathroom." It was a weak excuse, but I didn't know how to explain what I had seen. A little later, I couldn't shake the feeling of what I'd witnessed. I decided to go back to the bathroom and see if the hand was still there. Of course, when I pulled back the curtain, there was nothing. Absolutely nothing. I stood there, wondering if I had imagined it, but deep down, I knew I hadn't. When I told my dad about what happened, he didn't believe me. He brushed it off, saying I was probably just imagining things. He tried to offer a logical explanation for what I saw, but my mom wasn't as skeptical. She told my aunt about the incident, and my aunt's response wasn't one of surprise. In fact, she told my mom that I wasn't the first person in the family to experience something strange in that house. Over the years, various family members had seen things. One had seen a finger to the lips. Another heard footsteps like boots on gravel. One even saw a man standing at the foot of an uncle's bed. Another uncle had seen a figure outside his window, even though his room was on the third floor. It was rumored that 3 men had died in the house. One on the top floor, another in the basement, and the third, no one was sure where he'd died, but his presence could still be felt. After my experience, the house was eventually blessed. I haven't been back since. I often wonder if that place still carries that heavy energy, or if it's just my memories of the eerie feeling that remain. I've never told anyone this, and I honestly wasn't sure I ever would, but the events I'm about to share have haunted me for years. I was just a kid, around 6 or 7, when I had a dream that felt so real, it still feels like it happened just yesterday. It started with a young man, someone who looked a lot like me, walking down a dimly lit hallway in a house I didn't recognize. The air was heavy, almost too still. As he walked, a strange unease settled over him, like something was watching his every move. At the end of the hallway, there was a woman. I couldn't see her face at first, but there was something about her presence that felt wrong. As soon as the man noticed her, he tried to turn and run, but he tripped. He fell hard to the floor, clutching his ankle, wincing in pain. And then, the dream would come again. It seemed like every month or so, the same scene would replay. Sometimes I'd wake up in a cold sweat, unsure whether the nightmare itself frightened me, or if it was the overwhelming sense of helplessness it left behind. It felt like I was somehow bound to it. Each time, the dream ended the same way, with the man falling, injured, and unable to escape. A few years later, my family moved to a new house on a quiet street in Pine Lake, Texas. The place seemed nice, but there was something about it that made my skin crawl. It was a large home with long hallways and rooms that always felt too empty, too silent at times. At first, I thought it was just me adjusting to the change, but after a few days, the sensation of being watched started. You know that feeling, don't you? That sense that someone's there, even when you're all alone. It happened more than once, and the feeling was always strongest in the hallway. The same hallway from my dreams. That was my first clue. One afternoon, after a long day at school, I came home feeling drained. I decided to lie down and take a nap, thinking I could shake off the exhaustion. As I walked down the hall toward my room, I froze. There, at the end of the hallway, standing by the window, was the same woman I had seen in my dreams. Her eyes were dark, almost hollow, and her presence was suffocating. I couldn't move. I just stood there, staring at her, my heart pounding in my chest. It felt like she was waiting for me to do something, but I had no idea what. Fear washed over me, a crushing wave. I turned and ran out of the house, not stopping until I was outside, my chest tight with panic. Later that evening, one of my friends came over to hang out. We were in the backyard, kicking a soccer ball around, when he suddenly asked, "Hey, who's that woman in the window?" I turned to look, and there she was again, in the same spot, staring at us through the glass. Before I could say a word, I tripped and fell hard, twisting my ankle. It was the same thing that happened to the guy in my dream, the man who looked so much like me. I couldn't shake the feeling that these two events were connected. It felt like the dream had somehow crossed over into real life. The next day, I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. Something didn't feel right. I'd had other strange dreams before, but this one was different. In one of the most vivid dreams I've ever had, I found myself in a parking lot near the Houston Astrodome. A car pulled up, and a man got out. Just as he did, another car parked right in front of him, blocking his way. A dark figure stepped out, and before the man could react, he was shot. It didn't make sense at first, but the more I thought about it, the more familiar it felt. The woman from the hallway was there too, sitting in the passenger seat of the car. It was like I was watching a scene from my own life unfold in front of me. I know it sounds insane, but it was as if I were there, even though I wasn't. And the man in the dream, he looked so much like me. I started to wonder if these dreams were somehow showing me my future, or maybe someone else's fate. I didn't tell anyone about the shooting dream. I didn't want to scare anyone, especially with everything else that had already been happening. But then, just a few weeks later, something even stranger happened. I had another dream, this time about a car crash right in front of my house. I heard a woman screaming, "David, oh my God, David." When I woke up, I couldn't shake the eerie feeling that something wasn't right. Later that week, I found out that a guy named David Green, who lived just a few houses down, had been in a terrible accident. He didn't make it. When I was about 15 years old, I'm 31 now, my best friend lived in an old farmhouse on the outskirts of Silver Springs. The house was undeniably haunted, and even the previous owners refused to talk about it, which spoke volumes. Strange things happened there all the time. Lights flickering on and off, dishes floating across the room, figures appearing in mirrors, shadows moving when no one was there, footsteps echoing on empty floors, and doors slamming shut by themselves. It was like every horror story you've ever heard came to life in that place. One afternoon, we came back to the house, thinking my friend's mom had returned early and started doing laundry. The dryer was running, but when we checked, no one had been home all day. It didn't make sense, but we didn't think much of it at first. The creepiest experience, the one that still gives me chills, happened in that house's basement. It was a regular night, and my friend and I were working out in the basement. We had a radio on in the other room, playing softly in the background. Suddenly, the volume turned itself down. We figured it was just a glitch, so we went into the next room and turned it back up. A few minutes later, the volume turned itself down again. The radio wasn't fancy. It had a simple dial to adjust the volume, so it didn't make any sense. We shrugged it off and went back to working out. That's when we heard it, footsteps above us. They sprinted across the floor upstairs, slammed a door, then continued up another flight of stairs and slammed a second door. We froze, staring at each other. There shouldn't have been anyone home except for us. We raced upstairs to check, but the house was completely empty. Afterward, I decided to head home. I cut through his backyard and made my way to the street. When I was about 300 feet away, something made me glance back. The back porch light was flickering on and off. Then it stayed on, and standing in the light was a dark, shadowy figure. My stomach dropped. The figure began walking toward me. I quickened my pace, trying to shake off the creeping fear, but as soon as I did, the figure broke into a sprint. It was fast, too fast. Terrified, I ran as hard as I could, slipping on patches of ice, scrambling to get back on my feet, and pushing through someone's yard. The shadow was right behind me, breathing down my neck. I leaped over a brook, my heart pounding, and kept running until I reached home. When I burst through the door, the house was empty. My family wasn't back yet. Panicked, I called my friend, convinced he was playing some kind of prank. But when he answered, he sounded confused. I asked him how he could have gotten home so quickly, and he had no idea what I was talking about. I explained everything to him, and he was just as unsettled as I was. The next night I was working out again, but this time at our other friend's house just a few doors down. We were in the basement when we heard a loud slam on the bulkhead door. We looked toward the window, and there it was again, the same shadowy figure. I had to explain what had happened the night before, and our friend was just as freaked out as we were. When I left that night, I couldn't help but glance back. That's when I saw my buddy pop out from behind the house and run straight at me. At least I thought it was him. I took off running, trying a different route home this time, but once again, the figure was right behind me, just as fast as before. I barely made it home. Whatever that thing was, it didn't like me being there. I could always outrun anyone, but this thing was faster. I'm convinced it could have caught me if it had wanted to. The strangest part is what I discovered the next day. I retraced my steps to see if there were any footprints in the snow. Mine were there, but just before the brook, the other footprints veered off and disappeared into a swamp. The tracks headed right back toward my friend's house. That farmhouse was one of the most bizarre places I've ever been. My friend's family swore it was haunted, and after everything I experienced, I believed them. I haven't been back in years since his parents split up and moved away, but I'll never forget that night, or the thing that chased me. After reading through some chilling stories here, I felt compelled to share a few of my own. These experiences are all true and took place in my home state of Texas. Although I now live in Oklahoma, just south of Tulsa, those memories are still fresh in my mind. As a child, I had one encounter that I couldn't explain. I was about 8 or 9 years old, and it was Christmas Eve. I lay awake in bed, gazing out the window. The house was silent, everyone else fast asleep. Then, I heard a distinct thump on the roof, followed by the faint jingle of bells. Naturally, my mind went straight to Santa Claus. But when I looked out the window, there was nothing there. My family didn't hear anything, and to this day, I still don't know what it was. Things grew even stranger when I started high school. My freshman year, my mom, my brother, and I moved into an upstairs apartment in a complex in a quiet neighborhood near Silver Springs, Texas. The place had a simple layout, but something about it felt off. One night, as I sat alone on the couch watching TV, I heard my mom's bedroom door creak open, followed by the sound of my own door opening. Thinking she was checking on me, I waited for her to appear in the living room, but she never did. The hallway remained silent. A chill swept through me, and I quickly decided to go to bed, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling. On another occasion, I was home alone watching a movie when the tape stopped, and the living room light suddenly flickered and went out. The light switch was by the front door, and I was the only one there. Panicked, I ran to my friend's apartment just across the hall. When I told her what had happened, she went pale and said the exact same thing had occurred in her apartment just before I showed up. When my brother moved out, my mom and I relocated to a downstairs apartment in the same complex. For the first year, things were quiet, but eventually, the oddities started again. One night, I was sitting on the couch under a large framed photo of a ship. It was a beautiful picture, showing the ship docked in a harbor, ready to sail. As I sat there, I began hearing the unmistakable sound of creaking wood, the kind you'd expect from a ship rocking in the waves. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but when I leaned in closer, the sound continued, coming directly from the picture. After that, I couldn't bear having it in the apartment. One evening, I was watching TV alone when a heavy bell hanging by the front door rang loudly. My cat, who was curled up beside me, turned to look at it at the exact moment I did. The bell didn't move on its own. It was designed to ring only if it was physically struck. But there it was, ringing all on its own. The strangest experience in that apartment happened one night when I heard our patio gate open. I distinctly heard the latch release and the gate swing open. Thinking it was just a friend dropping by, I peeked out the window and saw someone's legs walk past. But no one knocked. When I gathered the courage to check, the gate was securely latched, and the patio was empty. Later, I met my first boyfriend, and things took an even darker turn. He was deeply into black magic, which I didn't know much about at the time. One of his cousins owned a custom-made Ouija board, and despite my skepticism, I agreed to try it with a friend. Nothing much happened during our session, but in the following days, strange things began occurring. One night, while sitting in my room, I heard light tapping on my window. I looked, but no one was there. A few nights later, a hat resting on a TV stand near some candles suddenly caught fire. I quickly extinguished it, but the event left me shaken. To my horror, I later discovered that same Ouija board under my bed, even though I had seen my friend take it home with her. I got rid of it, and it never appeared again. Some time later, I started working as a housekeeper at a retirement home for Masonic residents. The building was cold and eerie, especially the basement, which housed an old morgue. One day, I ventured into the storage rooms and found an embalming room. Against my better judgment, I opened a small door inside and discovered bone fragments buried in the dust. As soon as I saw them, I felt something pass through me, a bone-chilling, indescribable sensation. I immediately shut the door and left the room, but after that, I always felt as though something was watching me whenever I worked on that floor. The most unsettling experience came one stormy afternoon. While cleaning a reading room, I saw a woman step out of a bathroom at the end of the hall and walk into the break room. I assumed it was another staff member, so I walked toward the room. But when I got there, it was completely empty. I left the job shortly after, unable to shake the feeling that I had disturbed something in that building. Even now, years later, these memories haunt me. I've moved on, but I can't shake the fear of revisiting those places. Some things are better left undisturbed. I never believed in ghosts, not until things started happening that I couldn't explain. Growing up in a small town like Pine Lake, life was quiet and simple. There wasn't much to suggest I was especially sensitive to anything out of the ordinary. But that all changed when I was 9 years old, right after my uncle passed away. Uncle Mike and I were incredibly close. He had been battling cancer for years, and despite all the treatments, it eventually took its toll. He passed away in my grandmother's house, a big old farmhouse on the edge of town. That's when it felt like something inside me shifted, like a door to something else had opened. My grandmother would always tell me that Uncle Mike would visit her late at night. She'd hear his footsteps at the end of her bed, where he'd sit quietly to say good night. Eventually, those visits stopped, and she believed he found peace. For years, nothing else happened, until I was 19, pregnant with my son. It was like a strange family pattern. Whenever someone was about to have a baby, someone else in the family would pass away. This time, it was my great-uncle Tommy. He died just before my due date. The wake was scheduled to be held at my grandmother's house, and the family debated whether to rent tables and chairs for the patio, considering the weather. After a long discussion, we decided to go ahead with the plans. That night, something unexpected happened. Around 3 a.m., the phone rang. I picked it up, and there was Uncle Tommy's voice on the other end. His distinct southern drawl filled the line as he told me it wouldn't rain, that everything would be fine. Just as I was about to say something, my mom picked up the phone, hearing the tail end of the conversation. She panicked, calling for my dad, but the line went dead. Both of us heard him, and there was no mistaking it. It wasn't a dream. 2 months later, in May, I gave birth to my son. It was a difficult delivery, and I was exhausted by the time I finally got home to recover. One night, after falling into a fitful sleep, I woke up to see a little girl standing at the foot of my bed. She was dressed in an old-fashioned white dress, complete with boots and a bonnet, like something out of a century-old photograph. The room was dim, and the faint glow of moonlight filtered through the curtains, making her figure seem even more otherworldly. She didn't say anything or move. She just stared at me, then glanced at the cradle where my son lay sleeping. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. When I finally managed to shout, she was gone. I convinced myself it was just a bad dream and moved to another room to sleep. But the next night she appeared again. This time, she stood right next to my bed, gazing down at my son in the cradle. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed him and ran out of the room, refusing to sleep there again. From that moment on, I couldn't bring myself to stay in that room. A few years later, when my son turned 2, we moved into my cousin's house. It was an old, spacious place in the woods, with 4 bedrooms, one for my cousin, one for her daughter, one as a playroom, and one for my son and me. It was there that I saw the little girl once again. She seemed to be attached to that house, especially to the playroom, where people still claimed to see her late at night, playing with invisible friends. Despite how eerie it was, she never did anything harmful, just a reminder of the unseen world lingering in the background. A few months ago, I moved back into my grandmother's house to save money. The room I chose was close to where my uncle had passed away years earlier. From the moment I stepped in, I could feel his presence again. One night, while talking on the phone with my boyfriend, I noticed something strange. A reflection in one of the pictures hanging above my bed, his face. I turned around quickly, but there was no one there. I shook it off as my mind playing tricks on me. But the next morning, I talked to my grandmother, and she told me she'd seen him too, at the same time I had. Around 10 p.m., she saw him standing in the doorway, but she dismissed it as her imagination. That same night, we found out that my grandmother's aunt had passed away at exactly 10 p.m. Are these encounters a connection to the other side? Some might say no, but I know what I've experienced. These aren't just random sightings. They're messages from something beyond our understanding. I believe they're meant to reassure me, especially in times of change. Whatever the reason, these experiences have changed the way I see the world. There's more out there than we can ever fully comprehend. A few years back, my best friend Michael was given the responsibility of looking after his parents' house in a small town in southern Missouri while his father was stationed in Arizona with the military. It was an old, sprawling farmhouse in a quiet, historic neighborhood, the kind that looked like it had stories to tell. Knowing it was a lot to handle on his own, Michael asked me to move in and help him care for the place. The family dog, Daisy, a loyal but peculiar golden retriever, stayed behind to keep Michael company, and we quickly settled into a rhythm as housemates. At first, everything seemed perfectly normal. The house creaked and groaned, as old houses do, but I didn't think much of it. However, I began noticing something odd with Daisy. She'd sit in the kitchen, staring at the corner of the room, whining softly or pawing at the air, as if something was there. I'd check on her, offering food or letting her outside, but she'd just sit there, transfixed by something I couldn't see. Then came the footsteps. At night, when Michael was out with friends, I'd hear them, slow, deliberate footsteps pacing across the hallway upstairs. Sometimes, I could swear I heard the back door creak open and close, or someone walking across the wooden porch. I mentioned it to Michael, and to my surprise, he admitted that his sister, Laura, had also felt like something wasn't right. He even witnessed Daisy's strange behavior, but brushed it off as the dog just being, well, the dog. Things got even stranger when Laura returned home after finishing college for the year. I was excited to catch up with her, especially after hearing that she was somewhat of a spiritualist, practicing white magic and having a deep connection with the unseen world. I wasn't disappointed. Laura told us that she had sensed the house's spirits several times. According to her, their names were Samuel and Eleanor. They were an elderly couple who had lived in the house about 100 years ago. Samuel was the playful one, mischievous and prone to causing little disturbances, knocking things over, walking around at night, and even teasing Daisy. Eleanor, on the other hand, was much quieter, preferring things to stay neat and peaceful. She only made her presence known if the house became too chaotic or noisy. Once Laura moved back in, it felt as though Samuel and Eleanor were aware of her presence. Laura and I would sit in her room, chatting away, and if we laughed too loudly or turned up the music, the old portraits on her walls would fall. We'd often misplace our keys, only to find them in odd spots like the bathroom sink or a drawer in the kitchen. It became a bit of a running joke. Whenever something went missing, we'd laugh and say, "Must be Samuel at it again." For the most part, I wasn't really scared. Samuel and Eleanor seemed more mischievous than malicious, but everything changed the night I saw one of them. It was late, and my boyfriend, Jake, was over watching movies with us. As the evening wore on, he decided to stay the night. We headed to my room, locked the door to keep Daisy out, and crawled into bed. I was nearly asleep when I heard a soft noise coming from the door. Groggily, I glanced over and froze. In the doorway stood the figure of a tall man, dressed in an old-fashioned white shirt and dark trousers. I grabbed Jake and whispered, "Honey, I thought the door was locked." "Did you open it? Can you see him?" By the time Jake sat up to look, the figure had vanished. Panicking, I made Jake turn on the lights while I hid under the covers. Once the room was bright, I got up to check the door. It was still locked. That's when it hit me. Samuel must not have been happy that Jake had stayed the night. He wanted to make sure we knew it, and he did, a lot more effectively than I had ever anticipated. Hearing noises from a ghost is one thing, but seeing one, that was a whole different level. After that night, I couldn't shake the fear. I knew I couldn't stay in that house anymore. A few weeks later, I moved out and found a new place, one free of spirits. It's been almost 3 years, but I still sleep with a nightlight, and I make sure my blankets are pulled up to my chin. That house, and Samuel in particular, left an impression that I'll never forget. We always referred to it as the 1817 house, even though it had been standing for well over a century and a half. I was 12, Jess was 14, and we couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right about that place. It was more than just the creaky floorboards or the mysterious sounds. It was the atmosphere. There was an eerie sense of being watched, a suffocating presence that never let up. Even our mom, who was usually the first to dismiss any talk of the supernatural, seemed to have noticed something strange, but she would never admit it. Despite having separate rooms, Jess and I often found ourselves sleeping in the same bed. It wasn't out of comfort. It was a necessity. The house had a way of making you feel like something was just beyond your reach, hiding in the corners, waiting for the right moment to make its presence known. The attic, in particular, became the epicenter of our unease. The thumping sounds we hear up there, deep, heavy thuds that couldn't possibly be from an animal, echoed through the house at night. No matter where we went, you could always feel it. It was there. My first real experience took place one night when I was sleeping in my mom's room. Her bed was positioned near the door, right next to the stairway. I was just starting to drift off when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps coming from upstairs, one after another. They were slow, deliberate, and unmistakably human. The odd part? I was sure no one else was upstairs. I lay there in the dark, paralyzed, too afraid to move, too afraid to even call out. I couldn't explain it. It was like the steps were for me. The second experience happened to Jess. She had been reading in her room, the light from her bedside lamp casting soft shadows around her. Our beds were simple, just mattresses on the floor, and beside hers, an old chair sat empty. Or, at least it was supposed to be empty. Jess looked up, and there, sitting perfectly still in the chair, was a little girl. The girl was wearing yellow pajamas, but what struck Jess immediately was the deep, jagged cut around the girl's throat, like it had been slashed. The girl stared at her for a long moment, and then, in a voice that seemed too mature for her age, she began to speak. She told Jess a story, one about her and her sister, about how they were killed by their father. The girl described how she had been strangled while her sister was shot. And the truly unsettling part, the girl said her father's room used to be mine. Then there was the time I was with my older sister, Frankie. We were sitting in the living room, chatting quietly when we heard the sound of a baby crying. The thing was, there were no babies in the house. There hadn't been for years. Yet we both heard it, clear as day. The cry was faint but insistent, and we both followed the sound upstairs toward the source. We reached the bottom of the stairs, and there, in the middle of the hallway, was a baby, crawling. We froze, watching as it crawled slowly across the floor, heading toward the bathroom. But when it turned around to come back, we saw something that made our hearts stop. On its stomach was a large, bloody hole soaked through its blue onesie. The sight of it, an innocent child with an impossible wound, felt like something straight out of a nightmare. The fourth incident was mine, and it's the one that still haunts me. I was sitting halfway out of my window, smoking a cigarette, when I glanced back into my room. That's when I saw him, a man, standing there in the shadows of my room. He was just standing there staring at me. His face was the most terrifying thing I've ever seen. His eyes were dead, hollow, cold. He held a double-barrel shotgun in his left arm, cocked and ready. He was wearing old clothes, overalls, and a white undershirt, the kind you'd see in a photo from a century ago. But the worst part? When he turned his head, his image lagged behind, like his movements were out of sync with the world around him. It was as if time itself couldn't keep up with him. He locked eyes with me and said, in the coldest voice I've ever heard, "Get out of my damn house." And then, just like that, he was gone. To this day, I still don't know what happened in that house. We never experienced anything like it again, and I really hope we never do. Was it all in our heads? Maybe, but I don't think so. I'm not the type to believe in ghosts or anything supernatural, and yet, what we saw felt too real for it to just be imagination. Multiple people witnessed these things, and there's no logical explanation for any of it. Maybe we saw what our minds wanted us to see, or maybe something darker was there with us the whole time. I can't say for sure, but one thing is certain. The memories of that place still linger. The feeling of being watched, the images of things we couldn't explain, it stays with you. And sometimes when I'm alone at night, I can still feel it, like something is waiting, just out of sight. In the summer of 1993, I took a trip to a small, quiet town in the Pacific Northwest, one that would change the course of my life in ways I never could have imagined. What started as a simple vacation turned into something far stranger, a journey that would uncover secrets of life, death, and a lingering presence beyond the world we know. We were in a small town named Pine Hollow, a place that had long been steeped in history, with remnants of old buildings and whispers of a time when the town was central to a religious movement during the early 1800s. The town had seen its share of persecution during the early days of the country's religious tensions, and many of the original families had clung tightly to their beliefs, even when it seemed like they were the last to hold onto them. The town's church, a beautiful old structure with a tall steeple, had been the cornerstone of this spiritual perseverance. It was here, among the faded stained glass windows and creaking pews, that the town's true legacy had been preserved. On our visit, we were fortunate to have the pastor himself give us a private tour. As he guided us through the church, pointing out family heirlooms and personal artifacts, I could feel the weight of history in the air. The pastor spoke reverently of the church's founders, of a man whose influence had helped preserve faith during turbulent times, and I couldn't help but feel deeply moved by the connection these people had to a time long past. But it was after we left the church that the true mystery began. As we walked down the street, heading toward a small cemetery tucked away behind an old iron fence, we passed a charming antique store. Muna, a close friend, suggested we stop inside. I'd never been one for shopping, but something about the store called to me, and as we stepped inside, the air felt thick with memories. The store had that quiet, almost eerie vibe, the kind you get when you know that the objects within it have stories to tell. I immediately spotted a small weathered statue of the Virgin Mary, priced at just a few dollars. It felt almost as if it had been waiting for me. I decided to return after our coffee break and purchase it. On our way out, I glanced at a set of delicate rosary beads displayed in the window, their pink beads glimmering faintly in the low light. They were stunning. When we returned, I asked the shopkeeper about the beads. She seemed hesitant, but eventually led me to the back of the store, where a dusty shelf full of old photographs caught my eye. One particular photo, in black and white, stood out to me. A couple from the 1920s, dressed in old-fashioned attire, standing together in a garden. Beneath the photo was a small certificate, naming the man as Benjamin Reed, with the date 1919 scrawled in the corner. I asked if I could buy the photograph, but to my surprise, the shopkeeper insisted I take it for free. She explained that Benjamin was the brother of the woman in the photograph, but she could never remember her name. Then she handed me a worn prayer book, dated 1879, belonging to a woman named Ada Payne, Benjamin's mother, as I later learned. Along with it, there was a certificate of his life, a strange relic of the past. Though I offered to pay for the items, the shopkeeper refused, saying these were special items, too important to be sold. As I walked away with my new treasures, I felt a heaviness settle in my chest. I had her prayer book, the certificate, the photo, and the rosary, but still, the woman's identity remained a mystery. It was as if I was holding on to pieces of her life, yet I didn't know who she truly was. I couldn't shake the feeling, so I rushed back into the store and asked the shopkeeper if she could dig deeper. After a bit of searching, she returned with a name, Winifred Reed. Her prayer book had been dated 1918, and the shopkeeper explained that both Winifred and Benjamin had never married, leaving only fragments of their story behind. I stood there in the shop, clutching the prayer book and the photo, a sense of eerie completion creeping over me. I had discovered her name, and I now held pieces of her life. It was as if Winifred, in some way, had reached across the boundary between life and death, leaving me with gifts from beyond the veil. What do you think happened to Winifred and her brother? Could their spirits still linger in Pine Hollow, watching over their belongings? Or is there something darker that ties them to this world? When I got back home, I couldn't wait to tell my mom what had happened. I shared everything: the strange feeling I had in the cathedral, the encounter with that mysterious presence, and the way the woman had quietly guided me to that little antique shop. It was then that I realized who had been walking beside me that day. It had been Winifred. She had come to me, I'm sure of it, to make sure the precious items she had held close to her heart would end up in the right hands, ones that would appreciate them as much as she did. Since then, I've kept her memory alive, praying for her and her family, holding her treasures close, and feeling that quiet, spiritual connection with her. But the story didn't stop there. A few days after my eye surgery, I had a dream that was like no other. I was standing in the doorway of my bedroom, staring down the dark hallway, in front of an old, worn-out picture of the Blessed Mother. There she was, Winifred, but not as the woman I'd met. No, she was a child, no older than 11. She glowed with a soft, golden light that seemed to radiate from inside her, and her smile held a kind of quiet peace that words couldn't describe. She looked at me and softly explained that she had chosen to appear this way because she knew I wouldn't be frightened by the image of a little girl. In that dream, Winifred told me about 2 boys who had drowned some years ago in a nearby lake. She asked me to pray for them. I promised I would, and when I woke up, it was like a weight had been lifted from my chest. It wasn't just a dream. It felt like a call to action, something I needed to do. Since then, I've prayed for Winifred's family and those 2 boys every night. The rosary beads I'd bought at the antique shop are now part of my prayers. I feel an immense gratitude for being given the chance to be part of Winifred's story. A few months later, I called the antique store again, hoping to learn more. Jenny, the owner, told me more about Winifred's life. She had passed away that year, in 1993, at 91 years old. She'd lived in a charming old apartment overlooking the lake in a quiet town not far from the coast. Jenny told me that Winifred had been struggling with grief, especially after the passing of her mother, and that grief seemed to have kept her from ever marrying. It made sense. She had always been such a solitary figure, and I couldn't help but feel that she carried a deep sadness in her heart. I decided to visit Winifred's apartment, which was still empty after her passing. The large windows faced the lake, and I couldn't help but imagine Winifred sitting there, watching the tragic drowning incident unfold. Maybe she couldn't reach them in time. The thought of that weighed heavily on me. A week later, I went back to the antique shop to pick up the last of Winifred's belongings: a pair of white leather gloves, a prayer book from 1959, the year I was born, some jewelry, and a few other keepsakes. I felt as though they were meant for me, that I was somehow chosen to carry on her story. I've kept them close ever since. I may never fully understand why this happened to me, but one thing is certain: this experience has strengthened my faith, deepened my belief in the afterlife, and made me realize that there's a much larger family to which we all belong, one that stretches across time and space. Perhaps Winifred and her family are meant to be part of mine for generations to come. This is the story of a night in the small town of Pine Hill, nestled in the woods of West Virginia, a night that has stayed with me ever since. It's not just a story of fear. It's an experience I lived through, one that still haunts me every time I close my eyes. It all began with the wedding of my close friend Mike's sister, Emily. They lived just down the street from me, and we were like family. The house where the groom's family was supposed to stay for the night of the wedding was an old, abandoned place we all called the Red House. The house had been vacant for more than a decade, but every time you passed by it, you couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching you, like it knew your every move. I was just a kid back then, maybe 9 or 10 years old. The wedding was scheduled for the evening, as is the custom in many small towns, and would stretch into the early hours of the morning. Mike's dad had rented the Red House to house the groom's family and relatives for the night. The house was a tall, 3-story building, weathered and worn by time, but still imposing. Its old red-painted walls stood out, even in the dark. One evening, I was asked to go upstairs to the balcony on the first floor to grab some sweets that had been placed there for the groom's side. What I saw when I got there was beyond anything I could have imagined. I stepped out onto the balcony, and there, sitting on the low brick wall, was a woman dressed in a flowing white gown, her long hair cascading down her shoulders. She sat there, motionless, staring directly at me with eyes that were a haunting shade of crimson. Her eyes were the first thing I noticed, and they sent a chill right through me. Then her laugh rang out, a sharp, eerie sound that echoed through the air. It felt as if time itself had stopped. She spoke, her voice a strange mix of calm and frantic. "What do you want? Why have you come here?" Then her voice shifted, becoming almost childlike as she wept. "Go back, go back. I won't let anyone stay here. Leave, just leave this place." I was frozen in fear, unable to move, unable to speak. Her words echoed in my head, growing louder with every passing second. Then suddenly, without thinking, I turned and bolted. I ran down the stairs as fast as I could. My breath caught in my chest as I tried to explain to my mom what I had seen. When we returned to the balcony moments later, there was no sign of her. She had disappeared into the night, like she had never been there at all. We searched the house, but found nothing. My heart was racing, and an overwhelming sense of dread hung in the air, a feeling that something terrible had just happened. It wasn't long before we heard screams from downstairs. The wedding celebration, once filled with joy, had taken a tragic turn. The groom, who had been in the bathroom trying to fix a light bulb, had been electrocuted. His body was found lifeless on the floor. Word spread quickly, and the once celebratory event came to an abrupt halt. The marriage was canceled, and everyone hurried to leave the house. Whispers ran through the crowd. The red house was cursed, they said. No one would ever stay there again. Later that night, my grandmother sat me down and told me an old story about the red house. She said that many years ago, a man had lived there with his lover. One night, she disappeared without a trace, and the man was later found dead in the house, under mysterious circumstances. The town folk believed the man had killed her, and they claimed her vengeful spirit haunted the house ever since. According to the legend, her spirit wouldn't allow anyone to stay in the house, especially not for an event like a wedding. Those who dared to enter the house were doomed, and anyone who stayed would suffer a terrible fate. It was said that the woman's ghost had claimed the life of the groom that night, just as it had taken the life of her lover all those years ago. From that night on, the red house was abandoned, its dark secrets sealed away in the crumbling walls. To this day, no one dares to go near it. The name Red House has become synonymous with tragedy and bad luck. It is said that the spirit of the woman who died there still lingers, keeping the house under her curse, ensuring no peace will ever return. I still remember that night, the woman's red eyes, her eerie laugh, and the overwhelming sense of dread. Even now, years later, it feels as if that night is still alive in my memory, haunting me with every detail, every chilling moment. Hey everyone! I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way.